This is ContraZoom,
where we go back and forth about film.
I'm Dakota Arsenault.
And I'm Jeff Bulmer.
We are returning to an old format here on the podcast. This is our first director ranked show we have done since Wes Anderson's films were ranked back on episode 175. In the past, we have also ranked the filmographies of David Fincher on episode 134 and Christopher Nolan on episode 113. Joining this illustrious group of filmmakers is the works of Paul Thomas Anderson. PTA, for the first time in his career, can claim to be at the top of the movie-making mountain. His 10th narrative film, One Battle After Another, just won Best Picture, Best Director, and 4 other Oscars. This is the time to look at his complete works and discuss them all. Paul Thomas Anderson quickly rose to prominence within the film community in LA, making a couple shorts that played Sundance before parlaying that into a deal with a small company to write and direct a feature film. The film, originally titled Sydney, played at the 1996 Cannes Film Festival and was a hit. The movie, now called Hard 8, gave him the credibility to make bigger and bolder films. Starting with Boogie Nights, based on a short he made while in high school about a male porn star, he was given the green light to make whatever he wanted as a follow-up at New Line Cinema, which led to Magnolia. Every film would be more audacious and singular than the one before it. Other than Hard 8 and Punch Drunk Love, every single film has been nominated at the Oscars, leading to a grand total of 41 nominations and 9 wins, with the other wins coming from There Will Be Blood and Phantom Thread. While he does have one documentary credit to his name, for true completionists out there, we will not be discussing 2015's Junun. Anderson is also known for working with the same people over and over again. Some frequent collaborators include casting director Cassandra Koulakundis, who has cast every film except for Hard 8, cinematographer Robert Elswit, who shot 6 films, composer Johnny Greenwood scored 6 films, and then the following actors have appeared in multiple movies. Philip Seymour Hoffman leads the pack with 5, Melora Walters and John C. Reilly in 4 each, Philip Baker Hall and Luis Guzman in 3 each, while actors such as Daniel Day-Lewis, Julianne Moore, Joaquin Phoenix, and more have been in 2 films each. Over the course of this episode, we'll be discussing all 10 films in depth, which may include spoilers. I suggest if you haven't seen some of his films, that you go back and watch them first. But oftentimes, the point of PTA films isn't really the ending, but rather the journey he takes us on. Along with the films, at the end we'll name our own best film and give out acting awards. If you're not familiar with his filmography, I will list out the 10 titles we'll be talking about today in chronological order. Hard 8 from 1996, Boogie Nights from 1997, Magnolia from 1999, Punch Drunk Love from 2002, There Will Be Blood from 2007, The Master from 2012, Inherent Vice from 2014, Phantom Thread from 2017, Licorice Pizza from 2021, and of course, One Battle After Another from 2025. So, with that all said, Jeff, I would love to know, what was your first experience being exposed to PTA, and what is your journey with his filmography?
Well, my first PTA movie, I believe, was There Will Be Blood, because I lived in Nebraska. I was going to high school in Nebraska at the time, and at one point we went, I don't remember why, but we went to Omaha, which was an hour and a half away, for the weekend, and saw actually a movie by a different Anderson, The Darjeeling Limited. We saw that in the Indie Theater in Omaha. So shout out to the Dundee Theater in Omaha. And after that experience, I was like, wow, this is so cool to go to an indie theater where they play movies I've never heard of before and certainly wouldn't play in Seward usually. So we got to do this again. So there was one trailer attached to that, which was There Will Be Blood, where I'm like, why don't we go and see that? Maybe some of these memories are getting mixed up a little bit in my head, but I remember there being a trailer for There Will Be Blood, and I was like, let's go see that one. So when that came out a few months later, we went back to Omaha for, I don't remember exactly why. I don't think it was entirely just because of the theater trip, but we went there and we went to the theater and we saw There Will Be Blood, and I was blown away, and I couldn't talk to anyone about it because no one in Seward had seen it. And then the Oscars happened, and it did very well. It did pretty well. I don't think it didn't get Best Picture. It did pretty well. And then I remember some kid coming into my high school class, and he was like, "Yep, that's right. I've seen There Will Be Blood. I just watched it yesterday." I'm like, "Okay, wow, important, great. Where were you several months ago when I needed someone to talk to about it?" So now I'm glad that I get the opportunity to talk about There Will Be Blood once again Eventually. Not yet. We're not going to start with
Not
that
yet.
one unless
No.
we are.
And if I remember correctly, you've done an episode on There Will Be Blood, because I feel like I've heard you talk about that story before on Classic Movies Live. Am I accurate?
That is accurate.
Yeah.
That story is in our episode on There Will Be Blood from, I think, about 2 months ago as of time of this recording.
Yes, that's why it's so fresh in my memory. I'm sort of in a similar boat. There Will Be Blood was the first film of his that I saw as well. It came out when I was in college, and I'm trying to remember my movie-going experience, because I remember very vividly watching No Country for Old Men in theaters and just being so blown away by that. But I don't remember when I watched There Will Be Blood, but I would have seen it before the Oscars as well, and just being so blown away. And by that point, once I kind of knew that, I was like, oh, yeah, and then he's also the guy that did Magnolia and Boogie Nights. I'd heard of them, but I hadn't seen them. And then afterwards, I literally watched every movie in theaters as they came out, like to varying degrees of appreciation. And definitely, I think we're going to talk about this a lot. A lot of these movies I've only seen for the second time for this episode, and they've greatly grown in my estimation and my appreciation for them.
Now, another part of that question that you asked is my journey with the filmmaker, and I think I can condense that fairly quickly.
Sure.
But what's interesting is, like, I went and saw There Will Be Blood, and I didn't know who Paul Thomas Anderson was at the time, because I was like 13. I was like just at the beginning of my journey of watching movies in the first place. So I watched it based on the trailer. It looked interesting, and it was playing at the Dundee Theater. So I was like, I got to go to the Dundee Theater again. But then after that, I think... So after that, I've only seen, of his movies, the only other ones that I have seen in theaters as they were coming out were Inherent Vice, which also I watched based on an amazing, like I went and saw it based on an amazing poster. And I think One Battle After Another might be the first time I've gone to a movie because it was Paul Thomas Anderson. Because by the time that One Battle After Another came out, I was obviously very familiar with the filmmaker, had watched a lot more of his movies by then. But, I think he was one that, as I was like starting to get interested in, he doesn't put out movies like every year. I think there's usually about 5 or 6 years at least between his movies, with the exception of basically his run in the late 90s into 2000. But like, I somehow missed Phantom Thread in theaters. The Master, I remember watching like as soon as it came out on DVD, but I don't think I even heard of it before it was on DVD. So this is kind of a weird one, because like some of the other directors you mentioned, like Christopher Nolan, Wes Anderson, as for a long time, I've been, I've known those names to the point where if there's a Christopher Nolan movie coming out, doesn't matter what it is, I'm gonna see it. If there's a Wes Anderson movie coming out, I will make time to make sure I see it. But with Paul Thomas Anderson, I think I would also say that about myself now. But before that, it wasn't even like a disillusionment with him or anything. It's just kind of like somehow or another, the opportunity did not arise. I don't know how.
Yeah. Would you say now that going forward, he is must-watch cinema for you, though?
I would definitely say so, yeah.
I feel like now, especially where you're at in your movie-going journey, you try to catch up with basically almost every major new release anyways, and he has just become a part of that rotation, along the likes of, a Wes Anderson, a Christopher Nolan, people like that, where it's like, oh, they got a new movie going out, I'm going to go see it regardless who it is. Your Steven Spielbergs, people like that.
Mm-hmm. And also, this isn't really a spoiler, except that I liked this movie. One Battle After Another was one of my favorite movies of last year. I think it's like top 2. So, yeah. After that, I'm definitely going to go see, two Battle After Another when it comes out in a few years.
Yeah. If it's not one thing, it's another. Yeah, that's true. Well, awesome. I think this is a great time for us to kind of jump into the rankings. So the way this system works is both Jeff and I both ranked and rated the movies, and then I used some magic formula and came out with a 10 rankings. Jeff does not know the order, so this is going to be a surprise to him as we go through, and I'm very curious to sort of get his reaction on maybe where things place both in the context of the 10, in the context of his own rankings as well. So that's going to be very interesting to hear. But yeah, let's start things off with our number 10 film, which coincidentally was his very first film, and that is Hard Eight from 1996. And it is a stranger mentors a young, troubled Reno gambler. That doesn't really tell much about it, but basically the gist of this story, if you have not seen it, I feel like this is probably the most underseen of all of his films. John C. Reilly plays a down-on-his-luck man who Philip Baker Hall meets him at a diner, and John C. Reilly's like, hey, I'm broke. And Philip Baker Hall's like, I can help you make money if you want, if I will teach you how to gamble. And he's like, all right, let's do it. And so they go back to Nevada, where he teaches them all of his gambling tricks. And along the way, he meets Gwyneth Paltrow, a server at one of the bars, the casino bars, and they fall in love. And some chaos ensues, some minor chaos. So this is our number 10 film. Are you surprised that this movie came in so low for us, or do you think that sort of his career is just only onwards and upwards from here on out?
I mean, I'm a little surprised because this is like in the middle of the list for me. I really like this movie.
Yeah, this is one. It was the bottom of the pack for me, but it was a little bit higher for yours. It was your 7th film.
I will also say, I just said I'm surprised because I really like this movie. In the list of 10, there's one movie that I like, depending on the day, will tell you I didn't like this movie. But even then, these are all movies that I mostly liked. So maybe I shouldn't be surprised just because I liked it that it came near the bottom. It is really a case of like everything we're going to be talking about today is good, to get that very obvious observation out of the way 12 minutes in.
Yeah. It's the exact same thing for me. Every film I gave 4 stars or higher. Like,
oh wow.
Yeah, I did not expect to like these movies as much as I did on rewatch. I think I gave 3 or 4 5 stars out. But yeah, this is one that I gave 4 stars to, and I'm basically splitting hairs at the bottom of my list.
Yeah, there's 4 of these that I should have given 5 stars to, but two of them I was just too cowardly to actually commit to the full 5 stars. But anyway, we'll get there. So it was not this one, unfortunately.
Yeah. This movie, I think, really does a great job of showing the promise of Anderson. Early on, we get a fantastic long tracking shot of Sydney walking through the casino floor. And it's just sort of like what's to come, because he's become so synonymous with doing these like Martin Scorsese-esque one-ers where you can really sort of feel the influence that movies like Goodfellas and Casino have on Paul Thomas Anderson's career. And so it's really nice that like we see the inklings of where this is. Oftentimes with filmmakers, they'll do something with their first film and then the rest of their career is completely different. And it's like, oh, what were you trying to do with this first film? Was that you? Was that something else? But like all the seeds were there of what eventually is to become a hallmark Paul Thomas Anderson movie. What would you say thematically or stylistically Hard Eight is probably closest to? Because there's a couple movies in my mind that in terms of his filmography that I think this was a great template for, but I'm curious to know for you where this sort of fits in his oeuvre.
See, that's a really good question because when I was watching it, when I watched one battle after another in theaters, I was like, okay, I mean, this is a movie about a lot of things, but mostly it's about a father and his daughter. Like, it's a movie about fatherhood from both of those perspectives and something. And then as I was watching other movies, I was watching There Will Be Blood, and I'm like, oh, this is a movie about a father and his son. And then I watched Hard Eight, and this is a movie about a surrogate father and his surrogate son, and I'm like, wait a minute, I think I'm sensing a theme here. So, one thing, as you kind of already said, I think that one thing that's really neat about Hard Eight is you see like you see basically what all of the movies that Paul Thomas Anderson made later, like you see that same director in this movie, that same director, that same screenwriter in this movie. He's like he does evolve as a filmmaker, obviously, but it's not like I there are some filmmakers. Actually, I just saw a Spielberg movie where like I'm not going to say too much about it because that's not what we're talking about today. But Disclosure Day is not Jaws. They're very different movies. I mean, you can kind of still see if you know enough about Spielberg, you can kind of see who he is through those movies. But like with Paul Thomas Anderson, there are some themes that he's exploring in all of his movies that you can kind of that you just see. You're like, this is a Paul Thomas Anderson movie throughout all of these. I hope that's making sense. We'll talk about this many times. We're going to talk a lot about fathers and sons, and today I think is what I'm trying to get at. But what is this closest to of his other movies? I don't know. I would say it probably reminds me, like, this is actually a little bit okay for all of the stuff where I was just saying this is this fits perfectly into his body of work. It is a little weird also because like right after this he would make Boogie Nights and then Magnolia, which are huge in scope, and this is probably his smallest movie in scope
other than maybe Punch Drunk Love. But yeah.
Even then, but it's very different from Punch Drunk Love because Punch Drunk Love is like surreal, where this is like this feels like a noir movie almost.
Yeah, it's probably his most grounded film too.
Yeah, I think, and I don't think these movies are that similar, but I think that probably of his other movies, the one that to me feels closest to Hard Eight is One Battle After Another.
Oh, okay, because, interesting.
Those are the two movies. Those two movies are very obviously, I mean, very clearly about the relationship between a father and their and his child. And I think while that is a theme that comes up in many of these movies, I think that what he's trying to say about fatherhood kind of feels like he's coming at it. It feels like he's coming at the same. I don't know if this is the right way to put this. So, like, fatherhood is obviously a very, very big topic space, I guess, and it kind of feels like he's coming at the same parts of that topic in both movies. Though with Hard Eight, he's coming at it maybe a little bit more from having been that John C. Reilly character, the son in this case. While in One Battle After Another, it's very much it's much more focused on the Leo character, the father in that case. Where I think in Hard Eight, Sydney is a very interesting, very cool character, but like he's almost an I would say he's almost an idealistic father. Like, it's not that he's not flawed. There's some stuff we learn about him near the end, but for most of the movie, John C. Reilly is asking him, what's the catch? What's going on here? Why are you helping me? And he's like, I just like to help people, which makes him almost inscrutable in this way. Cause he's like, it's almost like that character is like he's this ideal father, basically from not having been in that. I mean, I'm maybe projecting here a little bit, but basically from not having already been, from Paul Thomas Anderson, not having already been in that role, and maybe having come out of the role of that John C. Reilly character, or being able to look at it with some distance. Where in One Battle After Another, like, you get these little moments from Leo that like you can't write. There's a lot of little script touches in there that like you can't write unless you've been in that position. So it feels almost like a mirror to that movie, I would say.
Interesting. Yeah, I can definitely see what you're talking about there. I do want to point out, I think one thing that's absolutely fascinating is the involvement of both Philip Seymour Hoffman and John C. Reilly in their careers and their career with Paul Thomas Anderson as well, because they both came up around the same time. Like, this was, I believe, John C. Reilly's first major role. Philip Seymour Hoffman had done a bunch of bit parts by this point. He has a small part as a gambler in Hard Eight. They both kind of come up as this kind of unique looking guys that can do some really serious acting. And then they both kind of went into comedy. And then Philip Seymour Hoffman swerved hard back into drama and didn't quite become a leading man, but definitely became like a leading character actor type. Whereas John C. Reilly, I feel like for the most part has kind of stayed more in the comedic realms. But just so fascinating looking at their careers and seeing how closely intertwined they were. And like, not to say that they were the same person, but early on in their career, essentially they were doing very similar types of roles, albeit with different results. But it's just so fascinating to sort of see how their careers grew out of this era.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was actually kind of surprised to see Philip Seymour Hoffman in this, because I knew he was going to be there, but it's basically a cameo part. Like,
yeah, without it being a cameo, because he's not a famous person. It's just a bit part sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very small.
Yeah, he's in one scene. He's a loud, boisterous gambler who like tries to get under the skin of Philip Baker Hall's character Sydney, and then like that's it. That's the scene.
Yeah, pretty much. He's not even a character that has like that much going on. Otherwise, he's just in one scene and never comes back.
Yeah.
Very, very strange.
I will say I really like Gwyneth Paltrow's performance in this. This was sort of the era of her peak for me, in that like mid to late 90s where she was doing the most interesting and daring work. She has a fantastic scene when like she's playing this server who like just has no confidence at all. She's aging, she's not making any money, she's not living the life she wanted to, and Sydney, is showing her real grace and humility and appreciation of who she is as a person, and is trying to take care of her and gives her, a safe place to sleep and some money for some food and things like that. And like, she is so heartbroken and broken in general that her response to that is to ask Sydney if he wants to fuck her, which is just like the most heartbreaking thing, where she doesn't know how to say thank you, or do you have ulterior motives? Her immediate response is just, this has to be a transaction of some sort. And it's just such a heartbreaking moment.
Yeah, and I think I think that's what is so interesting about the Philip Baker Hall character. And I think what is, the way I'm describing him is inscrutable, because on the one hand, yes, it is very heartbreaking to hear her ask that, and like basically his response being no, and he kind of admonishes her for it a little bit, not that hard, but he's like, why would you think that? But also, even if that weren't his motivation as a movie watcher, I'm expecting him to want something, or even if it's like he remembers, I don't know, his daughter or someone that he was close with, and he's like trying to make it up to her or something like that. And like, not really, like, again, we learn more about him at the end. He does have a past. He is a more complete character than I'm maybe letting on here. But like, he just seems like, for so much of the movie, he's just written as this good person who wants to do good things, and he's amazing in that role. It's very strange. Mm-hmm. It's what makes this movie, well, to keep saying it, kind of strange, because I think that
you're expecting more.
It plays with your expectations. Yeah. It's not necessarily that it is something like you're expecting more, but really it's just you're expecting. Maybe it is that. Maybe you're expecting more, because like there's these things that happen, and then it's not really that you're like, oh, that's it, but it's but kind of. And I think that like makes me think, when I was watching this movie, it made me think a lot deeper about like, well, why was I expecting more? Like, for what purpose? What is the thing that I was expecting, and what would that have meant, versus what does it mean to not get that? And
it sort of feels like that's the aspect that makes this feels like a first film. Like, later on, we see so much more complex characters, so much more morally gray characters, things like that. we're going to talk about that with the, when we get to it, his films that immediately followed it up, how much more complex and convoluted they were at times. And this is just like a very simple, I'm not saying this derogatory way, paint by number sort of, mentorship, you talked about the like parental, child surrogate sort of thing that like, that's what he's exploring. And he doesn't really have ambitions to go deeper than that, or maybe he was told to rein things in. I don't know. It'd be fascinating to know if like he had different plans and this is, what the final product was. I do know that when he screened the movie at Cannes, it was actually against the wishes of the distributor who had edited it differently. And so he had done his own cut at Cannes against their wishes. And when it was a hit, they relented and released his version. So that's all I know about that. Yeah, I'm trying to think of if I've got any other, major things I want to say. Something that doesn't quite work as well for me is the motel scene when, we've got Gwyneth Paltrow and John C. Reilly's character are planning to rob a John where Gwyneth Paltrow acts like a prostitute for a scene. That scene, that whole bit takes way too long. There's too much going on. It needed to be simplified and trimmed down. I think that's something that would have really helped elevate the film for me, because that bit just doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I mean, this is, well, as you said, it's a first film, and I mean, not even just as you said, it just is a first film, and he's trying a lot of things, and not all of them quite work out.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you kind of want to highlight as your final point on this? Either something that you want to say really worked for you, or maybe something that didn't work as well for you?
Well, there is one other part I want to talk about, and I know that like we won't be able to do this with every one of these movies, but because this movie is so, at least comparatively small, I think we do actually have the opportunity with this one to kind of talk about all the actors in it. And I don't want to, and we've already done that for most of them, but I wanted to ask you what you thought of Samuel L. Jackson in this movie.
I felt like he was playing, have you ever seen Jackie Brown?
I have, yes.
Okay. It kind of feels like he's playing the exact same character from Jackie Brown. And I don't know, Sam Jackson can be, very hit or miss. It sort of depends on how much a director is asking him to do. I've never really gravitated towards Sam Jackson as like a particularly deep character actor. And that's, once again, in the right role with the right director, he absolutely shines and steals movies away because of that. But in this, I kind of feel like it's too similar to stuff I've seen him do elsewhere. And he isn't really given much to do other than being an obnoxious wannabe gangster guy. And so like it was tough. Where like he did the part serviceably well, but compared to Reilly, Hall, and Paltrow, I think they all lapped him.
So I think that I mostly agree. I think that Sam Jackson's character is kind of I mean, this is the PTA episode. I'm gonna blame PTA for the fact that I don't really love his character here, because I think that he's fills like a really necessary role in the movie, because one thing I was talking about is, I mean, I keep saying how Philip Baker Hall's character Sidney is basically just a good guy the whole way through, which again, obviously not the entire way of the movie. It gets upset a little bit, but something needs to upset that. So you have Sam Jackson in there as a shit disturber. Yeah. He, fills that very important role, but like it doesn't feel like there's much more to that role other than at some point in this movie shit needs to get disturbed, and that'll happen through other ways as well. But there needs to be someone in here who provides some conflict even after the motel scene.
Yes.
And he that role, he fills that role well, and I think that Sam Jackson in that role, he does a good job. I just think it's probably the weakest part of the script from a writing perspective, because that character, like all three of those, I mean, you just said all three of those people lap him, and I don't think that's on the acting. I think that is, I mean, the acting as well. They're great actors in there, but I think that the reason for that is that they are all really, really interestingly written, and as complex as the characters in this movie get, where Samuel L. Jackson's character is a couple of steps above a stereotype.
Yes, yeah. And I feel like if he was to redo that movie now, that character would be far more interesting and dynamic.
Yeah, because I mean, again, to compare it to one of his later movies that we will obviously talk about later, like a similar sized role in a later movie is like the Benicio del Toro character, Sensei Sergio, in One
Mm.
Battle After Another. Those characters are not similar at all, but like the size and I think the role the size of that supporting role is fairly similar comparatively. And Sensei Sergio has a lot going on. He's a very complex character.
Yeah. All right, well, let us move on to our number 9 film, and that's going to be Punch Drunk Love from 2002. An entrepreneur with social anxiety falls victim to a blackmailing scheme that jeopardizes his chance at true love. So this is the one time that Adam Sandler and Paul Thomas Anderson have worked together. It was also kind of the first real dramatic role that Sandler had ever done, and that's sort of saying something because this is still mostly a comedy. But yeah, basically, Adam Sandler's character plays a toilet plunger salesman, and he's got 7 sisters, and he's got insane social anxiety because his 7 sisters bully him relentlessly, and he seems to have bad luck with love because he doesn't love himself, and he ends up meeting someone at the same time that he also calls a phone sex line that ends up scamming him. And here we get a actually, you know what? I won't even say much larger part. It's still a pretty small part from Philip Seymour Hoffman as the owner of the phone sex line scandal scamming guy. But yeah, this was like a huge breakout performance for Adam Sandler where people looked at him differently, I think, for the first time, and one in a role that, like, I think a lot of people really wish he would do more often because he is so good at it. And then he is played opposite Emily Watson as this new love of his life. So yeah, this is our number 9 film. And it was the 4th film in PTA's filmography. And it's probably, you know, alongside Hard 8, probably his most intimate story. You know, it really is, for the most part, these 2 characters. Philip Seymour Hoffman's probably the 3rd or 4th, you know, most prominent character in this film, and it's still pretty tiny.
Yeah, and actually, just like I said with Hard 8, this movie is probably his, like, along with Hard 8, probably his weirdest one. Actually, it probably is his weirdest one. Along with Hard 8, it's the one that I would say is most different from the other ones, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like this is his version of a fairy tale. You know, this movie is shot differently than everything else. There's a lot of lens flares in this. Color palettes, I feel, probably play the most important role in this film compared to other films. Maybe Inherent Vice is the only other one, but that's just more of a colorful film rather than the color palettes taking on such strong meaning.
Right.
But yeah, this was also, I feel like, a bit of a turning point in his career in terms of his movies looking a whole hell of a lot better. And that's not to say that Boogie Nights or Magnolia don't look good, but Punch Drunk Love, I feel like, is the first time in his career that the cinematography has as important of a relationship as the writing does for his look and feel of the movie.
Yeah, there's a lot of really beautifully blocked scenes in this movie.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, this is a very interesting one. You know, it's a comedy. It's an awkward comedy. There's some drama to it as well. So like, we're not going too far out of the box for what Adam Sandler can do, but like, you know, the scenes where he's around his sisters just feel like absolute hell to be around, and you totally understand why, you know, he punches the drywall.
Yeah, and I think those are, well, there's a lot of memorable scenes in this movie, but I think that one is the one that sticks with me the most, where he, you know, his sisters basically uh, pressure him into going to their dinner party that he doesn't want to be at, and while they're there, they brutally make fun of him, and then he punches. Is that where he punches through the drywall? He does that in the bathroom there, right? He breaks all their
Yeah.
glass, is what I remember.
Yes, I think this scene he breaks through glass, and then later when he goes to ask one of his brother-in-laws for help because he's a doctor, when in reality he's a dentist, he punches drywall, I believe.
Yeah, he's like, it's there's a lot of funny scenes. That's one of them. I love that he. I mean, it's funny and it's really sad because he is seriously suffering from depression. So he like goes. So he goes to his brother because he's a doctor, or his brother-in-law because he's a doctor. But his brother-in-law is a dentist, and he doesn't even need a doctor; he needs a therapist.
Yeah.
So I think there's some nice little touches like that.
And, I would say it's interesting between this and Magnolia in 99. I kind of feel like Paul Thomas Anderson highlights a subject that is now very common in like our current landscape, the topic of the male loneliness epidemic or things like that. Both Magnolia and Punch Drunk Love are dealing head on with that subject of sort of male loneliness and an inability to communicate your feelings, to have a healthy relationship with your family, to be an equal partner in a relationship. Those are all things that these characters are struggling with.
And I mean, not to go away from Punch Drunk Love for too long, but this is kind of what I was talking about with, or this is one of the things that I think is so interesting about Hard Eight too, is like that's something that you can already see a little bit developing in that movie because that is about that one. I think Punch Drunk Love is much more specifically centered around that male depression, male loneliness experience. But even in Hard Eight, like that's about three very lonely people who are lonely for different reasons who come together and aren't necessarily better for it, but like suddenly have something to live for. And I think that you know that's obviously a very different movie from Punch Drunk Love, but I think that you can already kind of see, you're watching Punch Drunk Love, you see what Adam Sandler's character is going through. Like the bones of that are already a little bit there in even in Hard Eight.
Mm-hmm. And like to sort of, flip side of what else is going on in the world of cinema at this time, I think a lot of, some filmmakers were covering things like toxic masculinity. I think of stuff like Fight Club or American Psycho coming out around the same time, 99 in particular, which is sort of the rise of the sort of male loneliness that like is now what we're talking about today, and mental health and things like that. But yeah, Paul Thomas Anderson was right on the forefront of being like, yeah, okay, the toxic masculinity is climbing up the hill, but the loneliness, that's what's waiting for you afterwards.
Yeah.
I also want to highlight how much going back and watching this after seeing the rise of the Safdie brothers, of just how much of a blueprint this movie is on their own career, especially, straight up casting Adam Sandler in Uncut Gems, which, despite being very different movies, thematically feel very similar.
I have I have a book sitting right next to me on my desk. No, you can't see it right now, obviously, but there's a book sitting right next to me on my desk, which is Paul Thomas Anderson Masterworks by Adam Naiman, local Toronto film critic. And the foreword of that book is written by, I believe, both of the Safdie brothers, and it is basically a short essay on how important Punch Drunk Love was to them. So, they obviously they were inspired, but like this is like the blueprint for Uncut Gems, but like their entire this is like what inspired them. It's a very it's maybe pretty obvious, but it's there.
There's a scene, I guess kind of early-ish on in the movie, again, where Marilyn Racecub, who plays Adam Sandler's sister, brings in Emily Watson into his shop. And this is the first time that that the Adam Sandler character, Barry, has basically been connected with the phone sex line scammer. And the tension of him trying to figure out what's going on with that because he knows he's being robbed and trying to deal with these threats, while at the same time his sister, who he's absolutely terrified of, is bringing in a woman that he is romantically interested in but is even more terrified of the prospect of that and all of these things going together. Like, that was a scene ripped straight out of a Safdie Brothers movie.
Oh yeah, it feels like, I was gonna say the scene in Uncut Gems where he's walking down the street, but literally any of them where the camera is right there, you feel you feel so tense just watching it,
The
and
music's going, yeah.
and he's dealing with five different people trying to do any number of things from bully him to kill him to killing him, and just like trying to navigate, thread that needle however he can, and doing a pretty piss poor job of it. And it's right there. It's that scene you just described.
Yeah. This is the one time that he worked with John Bryan as the film composer. Most of the time he has worked with Johnny Greenwood. That's going to come up a lot in our discussion, especially in his later films. What do you think of John Byron's music in this?
I will say it has been a little bit since I watched Punch Drunk Love. So I don't have it fresh in mind, but I do remember that it was. I mean, everything about this movie. This movie ranks fairly low for me because it's weird and I don't totally get it. But there's so many things here that are, you know, working together so well on an aesthetic level, like the cinematography that you pointed out, and the score. I remember the score being a part of that. This is like this movie has. I remember the score was like pretty perfect for what it was. I can't remember exactly. I don't remember any specific tracks as I am trying to look back. So I can't give as specific a feedback as I wish I could here. I
That's
remember
fair.
it being very, very appropriate, very good.
Yeah, it kind of, for me, it sort of oscillated between the sort of like Jacques Demy style fairy tale of love and yearning, of like every time it's the scenes with Barry and Lena together, and then these like heart pounding, you know, so intense, so physically repulsive moments of any time that he's either with on the phone with the Philip Seymour Hoffman character or dealing with his sisters, and just it's crazy how dynamic of a shift there is between those two moods, and how well it works for me pretty well. I think I like this movie more than you do, but it's still one that like is lower on my total rankings, and I think it's one sort of similar to what you're saying, and correct me if I'm misquoting you at all, but it kind of feels like it's a movie that the individual moments are sort of a little bit better than the sum of its parts, where like you can pull up a scene or a moment or a sequence or even just a shot and be like, wow, that's spectacular. But altogether, it does have a lot of highs and lows. It kind of the structure and the pacing is kind of a little bit all over the place, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I think I would mostly agree with that.
Okay.
It's a strange one. Like I can see how this would inspire someone like the Safdie brothers, or yeah, people like the Safdie brothers, and then Uncut Gems is to me like the perfect version of, I think, kind of not necessarily what this movie is going for, but aesthetically kind of what this movie is going for. Um, and as it is, it actually feels a little bit like, well, once again, to bring up Hard Eight felt like a first film, and one of the things that I said about that too was that he's trying a bunch of stuff and not everything works. And I think a lot more so than in a lot of his other movies, Punch Drunk Love also feels like a movie where he's trying a bunch of stuff. Punch Drunk Love doesn't feel like a first film, but it feels very different from a lot of the other movies around it. Like, Punch Drunk Love is nothing like Magnolia or Boogie Nights. He's trying completely different things, and some of them work, some of them don't. But it's just very weird, coming out, like watching some other Paul Thomas Anderson movie. I think I watched There Will Be Blood right before this. So watching There Will Be Blood and then into Punch Drunk Love, it's like, I think if you watched There Will Be Blood and then Magnolia, you would see a little bit of the DNA there. But with Punch Drunk Love, it's very. You can find it if you look, but it's very strange.
Yeah.
It's a very odd one in his filmography, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of smack dab in the middle of like his most grandiose films,
Hmm.
coming between Magnolia and There Will Be Blood. And maybe this is just him being like, I have an idea, it's smaller in scale and scope, and I need something a little more intimate, and something that isn't going to be a complete chaos.
Hmm.
So I don't know.
Although this is kind of complete chaos in a really interesting
Yeah,
way, but very
yeah.
differently than the way
Mhm.
Magnolia, for example, is complete chaos.
Yes. Last thing I want to highlight is, it's hard not to talk about this movie and the incredible scene-stealing performance from Philip Seymour Hoffman. Um, I know Philip Seymour Hoffman has done great works outside of PTA, but his legacy is his work with Paul Thomas Anderson and what he's been able to do in his films. And one scene basically where he's on the phone and just absolutely kills you with laughter. It is one of the most hilariously intense performances I've ever seen.
It's one of my the scene you're talking about is actually like even though this movie itself was relatively low, was pretty low on my rankings, that one scene is one of my favorite scenes in any of these movies.
Yeah. Just him repeatedly yelling, "Shut up" on the phone.
Yeah.
Are you good to move on, or do you have any last points you want to talk about?
Um just that I think I need to watch Punch Drunk Love a couple more times. Like I don't know what it is that doesn't click for me. But it's there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. But and we've talked about it. So, thank you for thank you for that. Thank you for this
Of
discussion on
course.
Punch Drunk Love. But let's move on to number 8.
Okay. I'm sure you've been waiting to find out when this movie will come up, but here it is. Coming in at number 8 is Licorice Pizza from 2021. A young man and a young woman grow up, run around, and fall in love in the San Fernando Valley in 1973. So far, of our 3 descriptions, that's actually probably the most accurate so far. This is a very loose, shaggy story of a teenage boy who I believe is 16 at the start of the film, and a young woman who I believe is supposed to be 23 at the start of the film, who he ends up being smitten with her. She refuses to acquiesce in his romance, and basically how their lives, they are connected no matter what they do, and it eventually becomes a love story. So yeah, this was your number 10 film, and the one that I imagine you were alluding to, that depending on the day of the week, you either don't care for or you do care for. So I'd love to sort of get your first thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think I appreciate this movie more than I like it. I know that a lot of people really, really like this movie, and it just does very little for me. Um, but what I do think, like, I think I watched this movie this time after I had There Will Be Blood is I watched that like 3 months ago. I'm gonna probably say for several movies that the next movie I watched was right after There Will Be Blood, because that one stays so fresh in my mind. But I watched There Will Be Blood. I watched The Master. Shortly after this one, I watched Inherent Vice, and I'm seeing like, and I watched Boogie Nights shortly before too. I'm seeing like Paul Thomas Anderson basically, um, like summarize entire time periods, like condense entire time periods and movements down into, you know 2 and 3 hour movies. And Licorice Pizza kind of feels similar to that, but where I think what he's saying about those time periods in some of those other movies I mentioned is very bleak. This one just feels like, remembering his childhood and making a hangout movie with all his friends, which I think is really cool, but I don't think personally for me I don't personally think for me this is as interesting as what he's saying with a lot of those other movies. And maybe it's just because I watched some bleak movies and then I watched this, which really it certainly isn't overtly bleak. I think you can read bleakness into anything. This movie definitely included. But like, it just felt, yeah, that's kind of that's why I think it just didn't click for me in that respect. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening here. It's very grand. It does kind of also condense an entire time period and movement into one thing, but like the most interesting stories of this, the most interesting people in this movie are the side characters, which I think is like a a good way to that's not an unusual way of making a really good movie. But I'm not particularly as interested in the main characters here
Mm.
for whichever reason. And hopefully, when we talk about it, we can suss out why. I'm very interested to talk to people who like this movie because I initially didn't, and the next time I watched it, I liked it more. But I still don't know, I still don't know why I should like this movie. So I'm very interested to talk to someone who did like it.
This is a very interesting one because I feel like this starts in a similar mold of something like Magnolia or Boogie Nights, where you've got this, very sprawling, large cast, large ideas and things like that, except for this one really starts to kind of hone in just on these two characters and their relationship. But then, unlike Magnolia or Boogie Nights, which had, I feel like, a much stronger structural story, this one is much looser. It's more similar to Inherent Vice in terms of Inherent Vice is what you would call a shaggy dog story, and Licorice Pizza is kind of similar in that same vein, where the first time I watched it, I was like, I think I like this movie. I don't know. And after our second rewatch, I was like, no, I love this movie. And what really helped for me, along with any time I rewatch Inherent Vice, is don't pay attention to the plot. The plot does not matter. And I think when you're kind of released from the grip of, well, what's their narrative arc? What's their structure? What's all this going on? What's the meaning of the Bradley Cooper character showing up? What's all this mean? And you just sort of appreciate the sort of hangout nature and it's more about the vibes than the destination. Like I said in my introduction, where, we're going to spoil these movies, but like the ending of a lot of these movies don't really matter. It is more about the journey. And this is the ultimate, it's about the journey movie for me.
Yeah, because I think you could describe the ending beat for beat, and it would. I I don't know what you'd be saying. Like, you could not watch this movie and probably describe the ending beat for beat. Like, it's a
Yeah.
pretty. It kind of ends up where you'd expect, but like the whole point is everything between that, obviously.
Mm-hmm. And I think for me, on rewatch especially, I really appreciate the chemistry that Alana Haim and Cooper Hoffman have together. I think overall their performances can be a little uneven at times, especially Cooper Hoffman. I think he's growing into being a great actor, but at this, I think he's still trying to figure things out. But their chemistry together, their moments together, I think are just so undeniable that, you want to root for them, even though all the signs are screaming at you saying you should not be rooting for them and they should not be together.
Yeah, and not me. I was following those signs. But no, I do see what you're saying about their performances. Like, I didn't want to root for them because I didn't like any part of that relationship from the very beginning. But individually as characters, they're at least interesting. I think Cooper Hoffman is like, he's playing his character is kind of such a scumbag, but like a lovable scumbag. Like, every time he's constantly doing some other weird business venture, and they're all at least scummy. Most of them are also like very stupid ideas. But like I think I read somewhere that like Paul Thomas Anderson based the character of, what is his name, Gary Valentine, off like a guy he knew that had a very similar life. He was like a he was a child star, and then he just started doing like random little weird business ventures, and made some kind of living. I don't know if he became someone super famous. I can't remember if Paul Thomas Anderson said like the name of the guy. But like, he just had this really weird, fascinating life of going around doing random shit, I guess.
Yeah, the guy it's based on, his name is Gary Gertzman,
Mm.
who is a friend of Paul Thomas Anderson. He was a child actor. He looks like he mostly is a producer these days. But yeah, like he was a young actor and doing very similar stuff to what the Cooper Hoffman character was doing. There's a movie that was in called Yours, Mine, and Ours, which is the main one that is sort of spoofed in there, which is a widower with 10 children falls for a widow with 8, and they must decide about forming a huge unconventional family, which is they literally recreate a scene for that on a talk show.
Yeah, I can't remember what exactly they call it, but it's a musical that has basically that exact premise.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that was it was based on stories that Gary Gertzman had told Paul Thomas Anderson, including meeting the what's his name, the Bradley Cooper character, who I'm blanking on what it was Barbara Streisand's
John Peters.
boyfriend. Yes, John Peters, who was like a real larger-than-life figure in the LA scene at the same time that PTA was growing up, who like also was kind of on the periphery of Hollywood because his dad was a local TV host. He would like, I think he did like, was like a newscaster, and then he also hosted like a late night movie showing where he would like play a character called Goulardi, where he would introduce horror movies like late at Saturday nights or something like that. So because of that, PTA grew up within sort of the Hollywood ecosystem, albeit on the outskirts because it was on the TV side of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just this movie. So obviously John Peters' real character here. This movie incorporates like a few real characters from that time in California, and it's so interesting reading about all of them. John Peters personally being the most interesting because I probably should have been more familiar with John Peters, but I was not. And he's a hairstylist who somehow he was a hairdresser who
Yeah.
became like, but he's so larger than life, and also married at one point to Barbara Streisand, obvious as you already said. That like, how on earth was John Peters, former hairdresser, this larger than life character in Hollywood that everyone knew? I think that's fascinating because
He has.
yeah. Sorry.
Did you know that he has a movie based on him too?
I have not seen the movie, but I have seen that he has a movie based on him. Shampoo, that's the one, right?
Yes. It is one of the most insane movies I have ever watched. None of it makes sense, and it is crazy. It's about Warren Beatty, who is a hairdresser to the stars and most beautiful women in LA, and how he sleeps with all of them. That's literally the plot of the movie. It is insane.
Wow, yeah, John Peters, and then Bradley Cooper plays him as an insane person.
Yes,
I can't remember. There was I don't know if you have the quote handy. There's an anecdote I read about the making of this movie where like Paul Thomas Anderson went to John Peters to get his approval to put him in the movie, and the only like John Peters said sure, but he had like one small request, which was his only request was that like he had to include Bradley Cooper saying his famous pickup line, which I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's like
it was like, do you like peanut butter sandwiches or something like that?
Yeah, and I was like, why would that be your only request?
Yeah. It's insane. And you mentioned how one of your favorite scenes, one of the funniest scenes for you was in Punch Drunk Love of Philip Seymour Hoffman yelling "Shut up." Bradley Cooper going Streisand is one of my favorite funny moments in a movie too from his filmography.
Yeah, I remember people when this movie came out talking about it wasn't very many people, and I don't know how serious they were. But I remember people talking about Bradley Cooper for supporting actor at the Oscars for this movie. And like, no, but also he is really, really good in this movie as John Peters.
Yeah. What else do I really like in this? Yeah. One of my favorite scenes in this, I'm going to, highlight once again, there's another impressive oneer. Very beginning of the movie when they're walking through the high school for this photo day. I don't know how long this scene is. It feels like it's 10 minutes long. Absolutely phenomenal camera work, choreography with all these moving people. Like, there's literally hundreds of people that are moving around in this scene for this school photo day. Absolutely impressive material that, like, you can see is right there from the beginning of Hard Eight. In every single movie, he's gotten better and better at using camera movement. But one of my favorite scenes in this is there's a moment, part of the film takes place during the gas shortage in the early 70s, and they have this big truck when they're trying to fill up a waterbed at John Peters' house, and they run out of gas, and they have to drive it down a hill. And it is one of the most intense and fantastic scenes in his whole filmography, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's like it's kind of like a car chase without a second car.
With one car, yeah. With a single car.
And it's very tense. You see them going down that hill and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was so impressed by it. Yeah, it's so good. Like, I'm sure I could tell how they shot it with a stunt driver on the outside, because when the camera's outside of the car, you can't see who's driving, but then on the inside, you can tell it's Alana Haim. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's very interesting. But I think it's one of my favorite, sequences from his filmography, and does a great job. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So is there anything else you kind of want to maybe add, maybe stuff that doesn't work for you that we want to talk through?
Well, one of my favorite things to do on podcasts like this, where it's, two white guys talking, is to talk about women in movies. So what's very interesting about this movie, there's a lot of things that are interesting about every one of these movies, but what's very interesting about this one, this is Paul Thomas Anderson's only movie with a female lead. I think if you really wanted to, you could kind of argue in favor, you could kind of argue that the other movies have female leads, but for example, in The Master, where Amy Adams, you could say, is maybe a lead, she's definitely at highest third build behind the two male stars, where Alana Haim is top build here, and she gets probably the most screen time of anyone in this movie. It's either her or Cooper Hoffman, and I think she's in more scenes than Cooper Hoffman. So I think that's interesting. Clearly, it does seem to me that for better or worse, and I think this is probably just a fairly neutral fact, really. Paul Thomas Anderson, his strong suit is not necessarily writing women. Not saying he's very bad at it, just that clearly that's not his comfort zone, since most of his movies don't have as prominent female roles. But Licorice Pizza, he steps outside of that. He actually makes a movie about a woman. And, I guess my question to you is, what do you think of that? Do you think it works? Do you think that Alana Haim as a leading woman, and what do you think of Alana Haim as a leading woman in this movie?
I think she's terrific. She's playing. It's interesting. We were talking a little bit about the character differences between Alana Haim and Cooper Hoffman, and I would say that they are both directionless in different ways. Cooper Hoffman is directionless in that he's always having to start a new business, and he always has a new idea because he can't figure out what he wants to do, and he's just like, well, let's just try something new. Whereas Alana Haim's character is directionless and paralyzed by that directionlessness. She's sort of trapped in this adolescent state of mind. She sort of acts younger. She gets along with, Cooper Hoffman's teenage boyfriends. We see a little bit of her home life, and she's clearly treated like the baby of the family. And it isn't until near the end of the film where she realizes that her calling might be local politics, and so she's getting involved with a local councilman who is running for mayor, which, to bring this all full circle, is Benny Safdie playing Councilman Wax, who I think does a great job in a small performance, and probably was a dream come true for him to be in a PTA film. But that's, you sort of see her coming into her own and becoming more of a fully fledged person, of understanding the world around her. And it's, instead of her looking inwards for fulfillment, she's looking outwards for fulfillment, and realizing that, community outreach and things like that is what she is most interested in. And so I think she does a great job of showing that growth of her character. But yeah, I thought she does a absolutely terrific job. I was really impressed by this performance. She was a first-time actor for this. Same with Cooper Hoffman, the two of them first-time actors, and I think she especially nailed it.
Yeah, she's great in this. And I think like as a character, from at a screen at the level of writing of her character, her character is written very well, but also like I'm I don't know. I maybe it's because of the lens I'm coming into this movie with. I feel like, the biggest part of her character is as or the biggest like conflict of her character is that part where you're saying they're both kind of directionless in different ways. I think that like um part of what's maybe frustrating about that, part of what is so paralyzing about that is like Cooper Hoffman's character, Gary Valentine. Gary is
Yeah.
like his directionlessness comes from the fact that he's young and he can do whatever, so he just keeps doing whatever. And like Alana Haim's character is Alana Kane. I always forget that. They're just
Mm-hmm.
named exactly the same things for her entire family. Um, but yeah, her directionlessness really comes through as like, okay, you've been doing well. She's never been doing the exact same things as Gary Valentine necessarily, but like up until that point in her life, she's also just been kind of drifting and doing whatever the next thing is. And at a certain point, like you got to decide, you can't really just drift between things. So I don't think that I think that there's like there's this implication from, especially from, put almost explicitly from the people in her family, especially, that like Alana Kane is, what happens to people like Gary Valentine if they can't settle on something eventually. Not that Gary has to anytime soon. But then there's also what I think is also interesting here, and is like Gary Valentine, the fact that he's able to just go on to a next business and start a next business, do waterbeds because he got a waterbed hookup somehow. Like he is immensely privileged in to be able to do that. And like Licorice Pizza is, to be clear, I'm not saying that Licorice Pizza needs to be a movie about people that are downtrodden. That's just not really what this movie is going for. But what's interesting in that conflict between them, or in that like comparison between Alana and Gary, is like you kind of get the feeling that although a part of it is definitely that he's just young, if he really wanted to, Gary could just keep doing random things forever and he'd probably be fine. Where
Mm-hmm.
with Alana, I don't get that feeling at all. In fact, from the beginning of the movie, there is like, she's as you said, like as you already pointed out, like her family treats her as the baby of the bunch. She's not really settled on anything, and she's paralyzed by that. And so, I was just saying that I feel like there is this sort of implication that like Alana's character is, what happens when you can't settle on something, 7 years after you're supposed to. Uh, but also, like, there's also never the implication that, like, if she was 16 and she didn't know Gary Valentine, and maybe she had her own cool, 24-year-old friend, uh, she would be selling waterbeds. It doesn't really feel like she would have had those same opportunities. Not, partially Gary creates that for himself, but Gary is in a position where he can create that for himself, where like she isn't. And she is also, we're not talking about someone who is like extremely disadvantaged here, but I do think that like I don't think it comes across super explicitly in this movie, but I do think that it is significant in this movie that the main character is a woman, because I think that what a part of what drives that conflict and what makes that directionlessness so paralyzing to Alana is that as a woman, as in that time especially, not that I think it would necessarily be that much better now, but as a woman, she's not, she doesn't have access to the opportunities that Gary seems to just get handed to him. Gary has a lot of other stuff going for him. His mom is his manager, and like he clearly has a lot of hookups, by which I mean like business connections. But there's I think that ends up I think that is significant, and it's another thing. Maybe it's just another instance of PTA trying something different, and I think that's really interesting. That's what I noticed most on my second watch of this movie.
Yeah, I think that's, I think that is a great way of encapsulating a lot of the different things that are going on in this film. Yeah, I feel like that kind of covers a lot of the things I want to talk about in this. We got a nice little cameo from John C. Reilly as Herman Munster. We get a little cameo from Maya Rudolph. But yeah, this is a movie that I think is a really divisive film for a number of different reasons. One, a lot of people don't care for the age gap relationship, which admittedly is uncomfortable. But also, I think bigger than that is the fact that this movie is so shaggy and can feel unfocused at times. But I think its unfocusedness is its charm for me.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I appreciate this movie more than I like it. The more distance I have from watching it the last time, the more I've been thinking about it, and like there's a lot to love here.
All right, well, let us go on to the next film in our countdown. And coming in at number 7, we've got Inherent Vice from 2014.
Speaking of shaggy
in 1970,
movies.
Pardon me?
Speaking of shaggy movies.
I know, right? In 1970, drug-fueled Los Angeles private investigator Larry Doc Sportello investigates the disappearance of a former girlfriend. I could try describing this plot, but I feel like I'm not going to be able to do that anyways. But that's basically the plot, is that there's a private investigator played by Joaquin Phoenix, and he is investigating, where his former girlfriend went, and in turn ends up getting wound up in a much bigger plot that has to do with drug dealing, has to do with real estate deals, has to do with human trafficking, a whole bunch of really heady subjects. But yeah, I will say, first off, it's very interesting looking at our rankings where we've got Punch Drunk Love and Licorice Pizza, which are probably the two most romantic relationship-based films near the bottom, and Inherent Vice and Licorice Pizza are his two most shaggy films that, to put it lightly, can feel directionless at times, whether you see that as a charm or not. So this movie comes very much in the vein of other, detective films from the 70s. I'm thinking of stuff like The Long Goodbye. There's a few other ones where I'm blanking on their names of it right now. But yeah, these sort of detective stories where you're not really sure what's going on. It's almost like a neo-noir in that regard. But fantastic color in this film. It's not black and white. It is the opposite of black and white. This is the movie with the most color. I really love a lot of the performances in this. This is a movie that, like I said with Licorice Pizza, where you kind of get caught up in the plot and you just got to let go. I tried doing that in Inherent Vice, but that's a little too hard because you want to pay attention to the plot. And by the end, it's so confusing. You realize that the entire point or resolution to this movie was Owen Wilson's character being reunited with his wife.
Yeah. I love this movie. And I think that this is one where, like, I actually so you were saying with Licorice Pizza, like, to let go of the plot, and you were saying maybe to do that with this one. I kind of disagree with that, but like, I think that in Inherent Vice, it's not that the plot matters, but for like different reasons than why a plot usually would matter. Like, I think what I think is so one of the things that I think is so funny about Inherent Vice, and part of the reason I love it so much, is there is this whole intricate web that's being woven, and like as you're going through it, like this movie, if you're following the plot and trying to follow exactly where everything goes, it sort of like goads you into being the exact kind of conspiracy theorist that its main character is. And then by the very end, none of it mattered, which is hilarious to me.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in this that you think is important that's a red herring that ends up not being important at all. And then every time we kind of get the moment of true exposition, we are also thrust into the perspective of Doc Sportello, who is high all the time, and you're watching this and he's confused and his mind wanders and sort of you get confused too, and you're like, wait, so what was Catherine Watterson saying there the whole time? I'm so confused.
Actually, I don't know why this never clicked for me the same way, but you just mentioning, and like this is very obvious. This isn't the part that, you know, just clicked for me. You were just mentioning Doc Sportello is high all the time, and like that just, my favorite scene in this movie is where Josh Brolin, who plays a Sasquatch, Bigfoot. Yeah, he plays the like straight laced detective, and he's, you know, trying to get to the bottom of the same mystery more or less. At the end of the movie, he comes into Doc Sportello's apartment like fully, you know, just completely out of it because this, you know, this mystery has taken a complete toll on him. He comes in, he like sees a plate of weed, eats all of it, and then leaves. And that's my favorite part of the movie. And I was just, you mentioning right now that Doc Sportello is high all the time made that click for me, because I'm like, oh, nothing makes sense in this, and like this whole mystery makes so little sense that he's like, maybe what he's thinking is, perhaps if I, you know, get into the mind of the enemy, it'll make even a little bit of sense for a moment.
Yeah.
And like we never get that explicitly from Josh Brolin's character. And in fact, I think we get very little explicitly about like this is a movie with like a narration. So we get a lot of what's going on in Doc Sportello's mind, regardless of how, you know, actually reliable any of that is. But we get very little, especially comparatively, from what's going on in Josh Brolin's character's mind, in Bigfoot's mind. So he kind of, his name is Bigfoot, and like he ends up coming across as this like mythical forest creature because we know enough about him to know that he's there and that he is, you know, constantly going to be stepping on Doc Sportello's feet, basically, and that, you know, he can influence things. But we never really know that enough about him that he ever comes across as more than this strange big man. And like, I love his character in this. This is one of my favorite Josh Brolin performances, maybe ever, because he's just this, you know, he feels like a Sasquatch. His name is Bigfoot, and he feels like he's Bigfoot in this movie.
He's beyond committed to this performance in a way that like makes it so unhinged. Like I think the most famous, you know, scene is of him eating a frozen chocolate dipped banana. And, you know, to put it bluntly, he's basically deep throating this banana as Doc is watching him in the car ride with like utter disgust, but also a little bit of amazement, I think, too, of the absurdity of the situation. And Josh Brolin is just so committed and so not breaking as this character that you believe that that's how he eats frozen bananas, that it's either too cold and so he has to like cool it down with his mouth, or, you know, he wants to savor the chocolate on the outside. I don't know what his rationale is, but whatever it is, Josh Brolin sells it.
But I mean, that's what makes him so fascinating as a character in this, is like he's selling it so hard that, you know, at the beginning you're like, oh, he's making like a stupid joke. He's, you know, he's trying to get Doc's goat for this or something. He's trying to like get on his nerves. And after a bit you're like, no, maybe that's just who he is. What's going on in that head?
He plays a very interesting character. I would say it's very similar to the character that Kevin Spacey plays in LA Confidential, as this police detective who is kind of famous because he dabbles in acting and being a consultant on police procedurals. And so that's what the Josh Brolin character is doing here. It's very similar to what's happening in LA Confidential, where he also has a bit acting sort of career as well. That's very interesting. So he does have this sort of like personality that he's aware of the hippies and their counterculture lifestyle, but because he's a cop, he can't really be involved with it. So his drug of choice is alcohol, like a lot of police officers or, you know, law-abiding people of the time, whereas the counterculture people are more into weed and things like that and LSD. So it's very interesting, the sort of complexities that they have. One of my favorite scenes, I feel like every movie we're talking about, what are our favorite scenes? My favorite scene is when Josh Brolin is ordering motu panakeku at the Japanese restaurant. And he's just yelling Japanese back at the chef.
That moto pankeku became part of mine and my friends' regular vocabulary after we saw this in theaters.
Just yelling at each other?
Pretty much.
Yeah, this movie looks fantastic. It might be his best shot film. I really love it. This is based on a Thomas Pynchon novel, which I haven't read, but he returns the Pynchon well for one battle after another. This one, I think, is more closely adapted to the Pynchon novel. But it is complicated, it is confusing, it's expansive, it's all over the place, it's interesting, it's sad, it's funny, it's scary at moments. Like there's just so much going on in this film. This kind of feels like PTA combining everything he had ever learned and everything that he has perfected put into one film.
Yeah. I need to read this book because apparently this is actually very, very close to the novel. So I've heard.
Interesting.
But yeah, I saw this twice in theaters. Back when I was saying earlier, back when PTA was not necessarily a draw for me in theaters, I saw this twice. Like this was, this is so funny. It is all of those things that you mentioned, and I think that like it really, it's like a really good send up of noir movies because it's not a parody film. Like it's not, it is very much in the, in the vein of noir movies, detective movies. It's obviously a comedy, but like, it's not like it's fully pastiching the genre or anything. But I think that like one of the things it does most effectively is build up this mystery that is itself just fully a rug pull to where at the very end you're like, well, what was the point of sitting through that? But weirdly enough, in a good way, where like I came out of this movie being like, what did I just see here? What happened? What was I just exposed to? But again, in a good way. Sometimes you go to a movie and you're like, what was the point of that? And it's very much not a good thing. Not the case here. I think this is like so fascinating that, when I come out of the movie and I'm like, what happened in the end there? It's making me think about every other part, because I think that this also is a really good use of the unreliable narrator, because there's very little, I don't know, it's very different than a lot of unreliable narrators where, at some point the narrator is specifically revealed to be unreliable and you realize, and you're like explicitly told that he was lying to you about something. But with this one, we're constantly getting that narration from Shasta, and we're sitting with Doc Sportello and in his perspective so often that by the end coming out of it very confused about what just happened is also what's going on with Doc Sportello. This is an unreliable narrator more due to incompetence than malice, which I think is really interesting, and makes for this was up until this was up until recently my favorite Paul Thomas Anderson movie by a lot, mostly because I hadn't seen all of them, but it's still the only reason this is as low in my rankings as it is. I put it at number 6. The only reason it's that low is because I've now watched all of them, and everything that I put above it is amazing. Like everything I put above it is better. This is the one that this is kind of where Paul Thomas Anderson really became a name for me.
Yeah. I will say the last thing I have to say is I've seen this movie both stoned and sober, and it doesn't make any more sense one way or the other. All right, well, let us move on to our next film, and we are coming in at number 6 now, and I think this is going to be a surprise for a lot of listeners. We have Magnolia here from 1999, an epic mosaic of interrelated characters search for love, forgiveness, and meaning in the San Fernando Valley. This is one of 2 films that, like, I was so on the first time I watched, and upon this rewatch, be like, nope, you were wrong, Dakota. I still think this movie is a little too long and could be tightened up a little bit. That said, what he manages to tackle and have so many moving pieces, and the fact that it's as coherent, understandable, relatable, and deeply affecting as it is nothing short of a miracle akin to It Raining Frogs.
Yeah, it's really impressive, and for so many people, I'm sure this will be a surprise for a lot of people, because for so many people, this is the Paul Thomas Anderson movie.
Yeah. So I'm curious then, this ended up low on both of our lists. I'm sort of curious why maybe it doesn't work as well for you, or is it just a case of everything else working that much more?
Well, the biggest reason is that second one, that everything else really worked way better for me. But
Okay.
Magnolia, this is one that the first time I watched it, I liked it quite a bit, and then the second time I watched it, I liked it a little bit less. I think just because, like, I don't know. There's a lot going on in this movie, and again, it's another instance of him trying a lot of things, not everything working. But in the case of Magnolia, I think that most of it, works more than it doesn't. But some of it clearly did not work for me. And man, the way that this is structured, maybe I just need to watch it again. I respect a lot of what he's doing here, because the way that this is structured makes it feel very strange. Like, it's not. It's. There's so many narratives going on, and I think that he structures them really, really well. Like, he manages to group pieces of each of those narratives into something that I noticed this a little too late on my second watch, and I really wish I'll watch for this the next time I watch it. But, like, I think that the way he puts together that narrative, he's combining all of these very disparate narratives into something, what I'm about to say is going to sound obvious, but hopefully I mean a little bit more nuance than that. But he combines them into one thing, which, again, obvious. But I think that, like, I noticed it a little more. I noticed it a little too late on my second watch of this. That, like, this is very much a movie about father, like so many other ones. It's very much a movie about, like, fathers and their children, among other things. But that's a very specific. That's a very, like, core theme of this movie, and the way that he structures it, I think. This is the part I noticed on my second watch through here, is that I think if you were to just sort of see it in the abstract, like, it is just kind of one story about reconciliation with your dad, but told through, like, 4 different perspectives, or I guess, really 4 different perspectives, 4 different ways of telling that story, each from 2 different perspectives. So it is like every main character feeds into that story a little bit, in such a way that they all feed into something slightly differently, but the way it's grouped, it kind of is just like one 3-act narrative, which I think is really interesting, and why it's something that I was like, that didn't really figure out how to put that into words until literally today, when there was not enough time to watch Magnolia before doing this podcast. And it is a commitment. Like, you have to sit down and commit to watching Magnolia, because it's 3 hours. So, not something I could just, randomly fire off there. But yeah, I don't know. I think I actually forgot your original question, but hopefully that answered it.
It wasn't really a question, more just a general statement on the impressiveness of how well this all comes together. And I guess my question is why maybe it was a bit lower for you. But I think you did a great job of articulating some of your overall general thoughts on this film. I already said that we're going to be revealing our own acting awards at the end of this episode. This film, for supporting performance for both male and female, across the board, an embarrassment of riches. You could pick anyone from this movie and you'd be right in saying it, whether it was, Tom Cruise or Jason Robards or Julianne Moore or John C. Reilly or Melora Walters. Like, everyone is absolutely terrific in this. What's his name? William H. Macy. Like, everyone in this is so damn good. We talked about a little bit, the sort of male loneliness, and we've got Tom Cruise as Frank T.J. Mackey, one of the all-time cinematic names, playing this manosphere prototype of basically a con artist of how to trick women to like you, which, were sort of all the rage in the early 2000s, dating gurus, things like that, which have, morphed into, unfortunately, the Andrew Tates of the world. But you can definitely see how he is the sort of prototype of this same sort of hyper-masculine, hyper-sexist womanizer who is just so self-loathing and just wants to pass that self-loathing on to everyone else.
Yeah, it's prescient in a way because I assume that the I have to assume that TJ Mackey, if he wasn't based on a real person, was at least based on like a type of guru that was around at the time. But like pickup artists like TJ Mackey didn't really like take off for another probably 5 or 6 years at least after this. And obviously now we're living in like the remnants of that, not even the golden age of it, because for pickup artists mostly as a concept seem to have kind of died off, at least in popular culture. The thing is that they've given way to what people now call, and what Louis Theroux recently called, the manosphere. So that's probably way worse. But not to say one is. I don't even want to say it's way worse, because that implies that pickup artists were better than anything. So anyway,
yeah.
Um,
All this to say, Tom Cruise is absolutely fantastic. Probably one of the best performances of his entire career.
I think it might be the only time he was nominated for an Oscar.
No, he's been nominated, I think, 3 or 4 times.
That makes sense, because if it was the only time, it would be, criminal.
Yeah, because he was nominated for supporting actor here. He also was nominated for lead actor in Born on the 4th of July.
And Jerry Maguire.
And Jerry Maguire. Yeah, so those are his 3 acting nominations that he's received. But yeah, what a stunning performance by him, where he is giving it his all. He is so over the top, so ridiculously flamboyant. And then to counter that, you realize all this sort of stems from this pain of abandonment by his father. And then when he goes to see his dying father, played by Philip Baker Hall, in one of his last performances.
It was not, his dying father is not played by Philip Baker Hall.
You're right. It was Jason Robards.
Yes. Although Philip Baker Hall is also in this, and we'll talk about him in a moment, because he's also fantastic. Hello?
And when he finally meets him up at the end and has this huge emotional outburst, it is very cathartic and fantastic acting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's Paul Thomas Anderson is really good for characters like this, like him, like forget his name, but Adam Sandler's character in Punch Drunk Love.
Barry.
Actually, kind of again in Licorice Pizza with Gary and Alana. All these characters very different, but like where the bad elements of those characters are also coming from like such a deep and interesting, and like a deep place of hurt that is like really interesting and well fleshed out. Because you see TJ Mackey starts off as like he starts the movie and ends the movie really as this huge asshole, but like you do see an interesting side of where that comes from. Like he's, he
Mm-hmm.
is at some level just the victim of his life that has come before, and he's, taken that in a direction where victim is maybe a kind term for him, but there is still, there is this like there is this deep inner life that is there and has left him, this deeply messed up person. He's a very
Yeah.
good he's very good in this. He's very good. Tom Cruise is
It's
pretty
like
cool.
when you learn that someone who is an abuser was abused as a child themselves or abused growing up, and it's not that you're like it excuses it, but you understand where this psyche was formed and how they grew into this person that they've become.
Yeah.
Um, and then two things I kind of want to just touch on here. One, very famously, there is a montage of all the cast members singing the song "Wise Up" by Amy Mann. Literally just direct address to camera singing this song, and it completely different from anything else that happens in this movie or anything else in PTA's career. And it works so well. Like I didn't appreciate the first time I saw it, but seeing it this time around, it really knocked me off my feet.
Um. Yeah, I
Was
don't
it
know.
something that didn't work for you as much?
I think that's probably the best way to say it. Like I don't hate it. I just
Yeah.
I didn't really get it. It's, with some of these with some of these movies, it is possible that like when I watch them, I just maybe Monday wasn't the right time to watch it or whatever. You know, couldn't tell you why it didn't work. I was just watching it and I'm like, okay.
Okay, fair enough. Well, the other one I want to talk about is I already alluded to it earlier, but when it starts raining frogs, this is, I've seen this movie twice now, and both times I was not expecting just how violent this storm of frogs are and just how many of them there are. Like it's uncomfortable how aggressively these frogs smash down onto the ground, smash into cars, breaking windows, all these things like that, and then they're just everywhere, and it is so uncomfortable to watch. How did you feel about the raining frog sequence?
So the raining frogs, it's one of the classic spoilers. I'm not gonna say all of the classic spoilers here, but like, when someone says, "Oh, did you know that in the Sixth Sense this
Yes.
happens?" And like you don't know about you haven't seen the sixth, even if you haven't seen the Sixth Sense, you know the spoiler. I think this is one of those classic ones where like, we are now currently spoiling that in Magnolia it rains frogs. But if you've never seen Magnolia, that's probably the one thing you know about it.
Yeah.
And so going into Magnolia, that was obviously one of the only things I knew about the movie. And so when you hear it's going to rain frogs, you imagine frogs falling from the sky, but I don't think anything could have prepared me for like how violent that is. It's very bloody.
Yeah.
And like as it's happening, you like start to fear for the characters' lives there, because William H Macy and John C. Riley are like out in it. I'm like, don't go out in that. Like hail can kill you. This frog will kill you.
Yes, and it won't be pretty, and it will smell awful.
Yeah. So yeah, it gets kind of tense just by it's weird because the way that I think this is a movie that is, very overtly about coincidences. Like it frames its disparate stories as like these are all things that happen and the lives of these characters intersect. Um, and Paul Thomas Anderson doesn't have them intersect randomly. It obviously builds to more more maybe less overt, but maybe less overt themes. It's definitely building to something more cogent with that. But like the frogs, I think, are kind of the ultimate. They're sort of the ultimate expression of these coincidences. The fact that like sometimes things just happen. Sometimes things just happen, and these wild things that feel like weird cosmic miracles just occur. Like the opening of this movie, where the narrator is describing like all of these different events that were just very very strange things that really happened. At least in the at least in the universe of the movie. I think
Mm-hmm.
they're all actually things that happened. But I think that like the raining frogs at the end is the ultimate expression of that, because basically it's like this is a real thing that happened, and sometimes these crazy cosmic miracles happen.
Yeah.
And so in that respect, once it starts raining frogs, it's, I don't want to say hopeful, but there's this like sense of wonder to it, but also there's this sense of violence to it, where like, on the one hand you're like, oh my god, wow, crazy, it's raining frogs, that's a beautiful weird cosmic coincidence. And then you see that the effect of that is that the streets are like filled with frogs, no one can get around, and there is blood all over the place, and it's like, oh, this is a lot all at once, and someone's gonna die in this. So I think that like it's cool what he does with that, because I think that the paired sense of wonder and like fear at the same time is something that I don't even know how you pull that off, and it works in Magnolia.
Yeah. No, I think it does a great job with that, and I think it also ties a sort of philosophical nature of the film altogether, which you were kind of alluding to there. Going back to these cosmic coincidences and cosmic things that could happen in the universe, and I think it does. It's a great way of saying of tying it all together. And there's a shot of the young boy, the quiz kid, who he's in the library studying, and he says, I think he says, this is happening or something like that, or this is real. And it's just sort of like an acknowledgement of like, oh, there are sometimes bigger things at play in the universe.
I think he says this is something that happens.
Oh yeah, this is something that
because
happens.
I remember hearing it, and like it's a weird way of putting it, but you saying this is happening just now puts that into context for me, because I was thinking like, this is something that happens is both a way of acknowledging that it is currently happening, but also that like this is possible.
Yes.
Because, and especially in the context of the quiz kid, he's a guy who just knows so much trivia. He's read about that before. He's read about what caused that. He knows that this is something that happens.
Yeah. Yeah, especially speaking probably because he was familiar with, the biblical plagues and things like that, because that was probably things that he studied. And so, if you're treating that text as the same as, a science textbook or, an encyclopedia of history, things like that. If you're putting them all together and things that you're reading, yeah, those are all things something that could happen.
Yeah, well, I think that like it is actually documented even in recent times. I could be wrong, but I had always heard that even in recent times, like, maybe not to that extent, but it has happened that like, not even really tornadoes, but basically small tornadoes, wind will pick up frogs, carry them, and then drop them other places. And if there's a lot of frogs in one place, you can actually get raining frogs. I think that has actually happened in like recent recorded history. Although now that I am thinking about it, my knowledge of that comes from hearing about it, and probably hearing about it in more depth as a kid. And so, I haven't fact checked that recently.
All right. Well, let's move on to our next film. I feel like we're just gonna end up talking about all these movies forever because we love them so much. Coming in at number 5, we've got The Master from 2012. A naval veteran arrives home from war, unsettled and uncertain of his future, until he is tantalized by a cult and its charismatic leader. This is PTA's movie on Scientology, or rather loosely based on the creation of Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard, the founder. You've got Philip Seymour Hoffman playing a character called Lancaster Dodd. He is basically an L. Ron character, because he's this writer who has pivoted onto religious texts, but they're more philosophical, which becomes a religion based on its following. Basically, he managed to turn pseudotherapy into a religion, and that's basically what Scientology is. But this features, 2 of the most monumental acting performances ever with Joaquin Phoenix and Philip Seymour Hoffman. It's sort of interesting. This is probably the one movie of his where, if you would ask me to rank his movies before on this rewatch, this would have been probably my number 1 or number 2 movie. This is the one that probably fell, the only movie that fell in my estimation, but that's more so I think others rose above it. So yeah, that's sort of my general thoughts on The Master and where it ranks for me.
Yeah, I was a little surprised to see this one coming in at number 5, because this is one of the ones I was talking about earlier where I was too cowardly to give it 5 stars. This one on a rewatch, this one might go up. I watched this one way back when it came out on DVD, and I liked it well enough. I recently rewatched it, and I loved this movie a lot. And like, if I still love it that much on a rewatch, this is a 5-star movie from me. Yeah, probably the best performance. I'm saying probably because I haven't seen his entire career. Probably the best performance of Philip Seymour Hoffman's career. And one of the all-time great Joaquin Phoenix performances. Great performances from like everyone in this. This one is, I think, I said I'm going to say this many times throughout the episode. I think the movie I watched before this was There Will Be Blood, and it's different in some ways in that There Will Be Blood is a very rural movie and this is a very urban movie, or at least by comparison. But similar to this is where I kind of identified an early theme that I figured was common with Paul Thomas Anderson movies. This is kind of encapsulating a whole generation of time in American history, and the outlook that it gives is pretty bleak ultimately, but it's bleak but comes from something. This feels weird, something like A Place of Love. This is like Paul Thomas Anderson reflecting on a society that you can't make a movie if you don't at least if you don't like this society in some level, but coming out with a very coming out with a very bleak messaging on it, because it's this is about sort of the rot at the center of this society in a slightly different way than There Will Be Blood is, but but really only because it takes place later. Like There Will Be Blood, we'll talk about that, but this one sort of where the rot at the center of that society is something very physical in There Will Be Blood. Here it's something kind of metaphysical. It's very Lancaster Dodd is he's sort of grabbing onto something much more abstract in that pseudo philosophy, and he creates this cult, which I think I think that in The Master it's very clear, sort of what this cult is, but I think that it represents more beyond that. I think that like the maybe this will come out more as we talk about it, but I kind of think that like the cult that Lancaster Dodd is creating, this I'm going to call it pseudo Scientology here for now. I can't remember exactly. I think it's called The Path, something like that.
I can't remember exactly what it is. Yeah.
But anyway, this stand-in for Scientology is also a stand-in for a little bit more than that, because this is something eating away at society, something that like latches on to people that need this kind of thing, or that need something in their lives, and this is filling a hole, but really it's just it's really just eating away at it even more. And this is was this his movie after There Will Be Blood? Because thematically, it feels like a twin to that movie.
Yes, this was the one that came right after There Will Be Blood.
Okay. Yeah, that's my general thoughts on it.
Yeah. It's just so much fascinating stuff going on in this. One of the things I really appreciate is the casting that went on in this. I don't know how everyone in this movie actually feels like they're from the 50s. Like, it is shocking how well cast this movie is, adding in the costume design, the production design, all these sort of elements are just beyond fascinating to look at. Because if you told me this movie came out then, that this was a contemporary movie of the 50s, I would absolutely believe you.
Yeah, the only barrier to me believing that would be, I mean, beyond the fact that I know these actors, would be that this movie, like, the fidelity of this movie is a little bit too high for 1950s. But yeah, they feel ripped right out of it. And one of those things is like, apparently this is because I've heard that this is because Joaquin Phoenix's scoliosis was acting up on set, but he did this like very weird stance that he
Yeah.
does in the whole movie, and like I don't know why, but that just feels that makes so much of his character. I don't know why you saying that it felt like it was right out of the 50s reminded me of that specifically, but like it just he feels so much like he feels so much like a guy who was a soldier and you know uh, didn't have a place to go afterwards. I mean, a lot of that is obviously more than that, but that stance, puts all of that, into a very physical performance. Well, it's a very physical performance, but even that part, that's such a weird and effective physical characterization, and like, putting together his whole character right there. Just Joaquin Phoenix standing the weirdest he's ever stood, and it works so well in this movie.
Yeah, it really does. I would have to say probably the best acting in this movie is the processing scene, the first processing scene where Freddie and Lancaster are on the boat, and Lancaster introduces this idea of processing to him, where it's a lot of word association, things like that, but like it's just two actors alone in a room together giving it their all, and it's fascinating to watch. And honestly, it's like a textbook scene of like, if you want to study acting, look at what they're doing in this, with the listening, with the talking, with the way they're interacting with each other. All of it's phenomenal.
And that scene to me also, we talked about this with Inherent Vice a little bit. I thought that one of the things that's so effective in Inherent Vice is that like the way that Paul Thomas Anderson strings that story together, you end up by the end you feel as insane as Doc is in that. And here, I think that processing scene is so effective because if you try and look at it objectively, it's just cold reading. Like Philip Seymour Hoffman is doing he's doing a parlor trick on Joaquin Phoenix, but in that moment, it feels like magic. It feels like Philip Seymour Hoffman is reading his mind, and it feels like very effective. It feels very effective. You immediately understand in that moment why Joaquin Phoenix's character falls so hard for Lancaster Dodd and like becomes becomes one of the truest believers of, I gotta look up exactly what it's called. I'm gonna say The Path, and hopefully I'm gonna keep saying that because hopefully I remembered it right. The Cause. It's The Cause.
The Cause, yes.
Yeah. You immediately understand why he takes to that so hard, while also throughout the movie, like, it's never a secret, it's never hidden from you the viewer that Lancaster Dodd is a huckster.
Yeah, right. It's absolutely true, and yeah, I think he also just loves having this attack dog in Freddie, because Freddie is so looking for a place in the world and so looking for recognition and acceptance, and Lancaster has someone who is so able to willingly throw himself at his feet at his own mercy.
Mm-hmm.
It's fascinating for sure. That's kind of it that I have to say about the Master. Is there anything else you kind of want to end on, or are we good to move on?
There's so much to love about this movie. This was my number 3 on my list. Obviously, we haven't talked about my top 2 yet, and we haven't talked about quite a few. So we'll talk about the rest of that list. But this, I think that like this movie actually, one person I do want to shout out. This movie has a really good, very small role from Laura Dern, who plays another true believer, and like
Yeah.
a true believer in a different way, like in a slightly different way, but where you sort of see exactly the kind of person, when you in the similarities between her and Joaquin Phoenix's character. I guess his name is Freddie
Mm-hmm.
Quell. In the similarities between them, you kind of see what kind of person Lancaster Dodd is grabbing onto. But she has this really good scene. So her first scene, she's introduced as basically, she's kind of like a affiliate chapter of the cause, because she reads the books. Like, she reads the books, she's talked to Lancaster Dodd. She is basically preaching the cause to people that he wouldn't have otherwise reached because they're in a different place. um, so they visit her, and you get this you get this room full of people that are true believers in this. And later on, she has a scene where, after his second book comes out, she questions him on, like, one of the inconsistencies she finds between the two books. Because in her mind, and, like, of course this would be the case in her mind, what he's in his first book, he was portraying, like, a very consistent worldview. She's been teaching that worldview. So when she sees in the second book that there are some contradictions, she goes up to him, not even confronting him really. She just asks him, like, hey, can you explain these contradictions so that I can, basically, I don't think she says this part, but it's very clear that she sort of means, so that I can effectively teach this and
Yeah.
keep spreading your message. And he completely loses it at being called out just a little bit, even though he's not even really being called out. And it's a great scene for both her and for Philip Seymour Hoffman, because it shows just how fragile this guy is, who, you know, like, his, the movie is called The Master, and no one explicitly calls him Master in this, but it's very clear that the Master in this case is Lancaster Dodd. And, like, the moment he's even questioned, not even confronted, he completely crumbles. Which it's such a good scene, and I think that that's part of that's definitely part of the social commentary that Paul Thomas Anderson is so effectively doing with this, because it's basically the rot that this movie is talking about. First off, it affects everybody, but the person that's, like, pushing it hardest, he's not pushing something that is firm. Clearly, like, the moment you push at it, it crumbles. And I think it's a great scene. That's mostly what I wanted to shout out there. Is Laura Dern has some great scenes in this, and I think that, like, what he's able to do with this pseudo psychology, the cause, this, like, stand in for Scientology, is so effective at dismantling, um, this, or at least showing this cult behavior, and really how weak it ultimately is. Because even in the end, like, it ends up having to be propped up by essentially absolute loyalty. Like, no one can question the cause at all, because they'll just be excommunicated. They're just not wanted anymore in the cause. The strongest believer is basically excommunicated at the very end.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that it's a great movie about exactly that. A very effective way of telling a story like that. Yeah, like I said, this is one that, the more I think about it, the better it's gotten, and I already had it at a soft 5. It'll probably go up to a hard 5 if I watch it again.
I love to hear that. Well, let's move on to our next film. And coming in at number 4, we've got Phantom Thread from 2017. Set in 1950s London, Reynolds Woodcock is a renowned dressmaker whose fastidious life is disrupted by a young, strong-willed woman, Alma, who becomes his muse and lover. Yeah, you say interesting right off the top there. This is another one of your highly ranked ones. You did rank this 4th on your ballot, and this is 4th. I also have it 4th, so this is exactly where it was meant to be for us.
I say interesting because at this point, anyone who's been paying attention, including myself, including you, knows what the last couple of movies are. And there's I have an idea of what the last 2 probably are. I'm not 100% sure of the order, but there's another one we haven't talked about yet that I would have expected to have come up before Phantom Thread. It will probably come up immediately after Phantom Thread, so I won't even talk about what it is. But yeah, this is the one that I have watched least recently of all of these. It's the only one that I didn't get a chance to watch directly in preparation for this episode, but I did watch it around Christmas of 2025, so it's still relatively fresh. This is cool. This is I really like this movie. This is one of his more it's one of his smaller movies in scope, though even there it is, like, I think it's grand on about the scale of something like The Master, but it is very intimate in that it's basically three characters throughout the whole movie, and it is very centered on. It is a linear story centered very directly on one relationship, which is in is quite in contrast to some of the other things we've talked about, like Licorice Pizza and Magnolia. I guess Licorice Pizza is based largely on one relationship, but Licorice Pizza and Magnolia, for example, are both, they're much more sprawling. Where Phantom Thread, there's some big moments, but it's very intimate, which is at least a little bit unusual for Paul Thomas Anderson. This doesn't feel as weird as something like Punch Drunk Love, but it does feel, you know, it's definitely different than something like Magnolia, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this definitely has a more unique structure. It sort of seems on the surface to be a simple biopic of a dressmaker turned into a relationship story, but in the end this ends up becoming something very differently, dealing with power dynamics, relationships, submission and control, all that sort of stuff, which like really kind of feels like a too spoilery, but like not really. Like I don't know how much we're going to dance around what this movie ends up becoming, but one thing you cannot fault about this movie in the slightest is it looks gorgeous. Anytime a movie is about fashion, you have to make sure that the costume design is on point, and it is absolutely on point here. And you could see how Reynolds' designs would be, the toast of Europe, where he would literally be designing wedding dresses for princesses, things like that.
And importantly, this movie did win Best Costume Design at the Academy Awards, which I think, first off, the costumes are amazing in this, but I think it's very, very important that you have amazing costumes that are potentially Oscar worthy for a movie about a guy who is the toast of Europe.
Yeah.
Because of his dressmaking.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot in this movie that I really love. There's the fantastic scene early on in the movie that a lot of people will talk about is when he's ordering breakfast, and just everything about, the combination, everything about Reynolds' life has to be sensual. And that comes down to food as well. And when he's ordering this breakfast and he's basically ordering everything off of the menu done in a very particular way, is just done so sensually. And that's him flirting with Alma for the first time. That is so good, where he's like, put down your notepad. Can you remember it back? Can you say it back to me what I ordered? And she says it back exactly the same way. It's just so fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't even know what to add on that. He's so particular, and it's another one where actually this is another one that was no, this wasn't his movie after The Master. After The Master came Inherent Vice, and then came this one. And I was just thinking, I was just talking about Philip Seymour Hoffman's sort of fragility in The Master, and I think that like Daniel Day-Lewis does a similar thing here with Reynolds Woodcock, where for the whole movie he's built up as this almost, this almost unapproachably hard master, essentially. There's clearly a better word for what I'm trying to say, but for lack of a better word, I guess, because I can't think of it, he's so unapproachable, so firm in the way that he has to have things. And then later on, when his perfect facade is broken by even the smallest thing going wrong, and later on those small things definitely get a lot worse, he completely crumbles under it. There's an entire sequence in this where a dress is slightly wrong, so they need to stay up all of his workers need to stay up all night fixing it while he is sick. And like he can't, not that he would be there in the trenches with the seamstresses anyway, which I think is a big part of what that scene shows, but he's like pathetically sitting in the bathroom puking his guts out while all of his seamstresses are doing the work that he is about to get all the credit for. And I will mention that like my summary of that scene doesn't come directly, but is at least partially paraphrased on Adam Naiman's summary of the same scene from the book that I mentioned earlier.
Nice, good. Yeah, that sounds like a very fascinating book. I'll have to check that one out. Yeah, I also think it's something that he does really well that I feel he doesn't really highlight in his other films is sound design is very important. You know, there's a scene where Alma is having breakfast at Reynolds' house with him and his sister, and he gets annoyed by her eating and the way she butters her toast, and it's so loud and so grating that like you can't help but hate it. And then later in the film, once they've sort of figured out their relationship, we see another breakfast scene and she eats perfectly silently and the sound design isn't picking up anything. So I love the contrast and the comparison between those two moments.
One thing that I've noticed, especially while talking about these movies over the last hour or so, is I think that Paul Thomas Anderson is very good at getting you inside of characters' heads. And like he's not the only director that can do that. But like I was just talking about that with Inherent Vice and with The Master. And that comes across the same way in Phantom Thread because I think that so for one thing, when she is buttering her toast and you know he's complaining that it is so loud, to us the audience, it isn't actually that loud. Like it sounds normal. Paul Thomas Anderson isn't blowing it out to the point where like you are annoyed with her buttering her toast, but it is also like very audible. You can hear it. You can hear her buttering her toast. You can hear everything that he's complaining about. And you're like, oh, is that really a problem? But the point being, you actually know what he's talking about. So you can get into that space. And it kind of gets you into both of those heads at the same time. Because on the one hand, you hear what Reynolds Woodcock is talking about. You hear that. And so you can see how, you know, he's being a little bit of a baby about it, but he is talking about a real thing, and it gets you into Alma's head at the same time because you know he's being a little bit of a baby about it. So and the sound design is there so that you can hear it, so you know what he's talking about, but it's not so overbearing that like you immediately pick a side. Which you know I think it's very different from the way that he gets you into the head of Freddy in The Master or gets you into the head of Doc in Inherent Vice, but it's no less effective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just using a different way to get inside of his head, which I think is so unique. He's able to do so many different ways of the similar end result.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is probably Johnny Greenwood's best score with in a Paul Thomas Anderson film. I absolutely adore it. I don't know if you have a favorite.
I do have a favorite. It's not this one, but this one is very, very good.
Yeah, it's up there.
Yeah.
That's fair. Okay, well, let us move on to our next film, and that is the number 3 film, and that is Boogie Nights from 1997. An idealistic porn producer aspires to elevate his craft to an art when he discovers a hot young talent. So this was originally PTA made this as a short film, and then he made this into a feature film. This was the second film that he did. It tells the story of the fictional male porn star Dirk Diggler, who was based on a real male porn star. I can't remember his name right now. Who, you know, was a hot shot, new on the scene in the 70s and sort of his rise and fall. This is probably, you know, up there with Magnolia as his 2 most expansive films in terms of the amount of characters and stories and plots that we're following along. Yes, this one has more of a main character of Dirk Diggler played by Mark Wahlberg than Magnolia has, which is more of a true ensemble. But it's almost, you know, interesting, you know, as good as Mark Wahlberg is in this part, he is absolutely outshone by literally everyone else in this movie. That said, you know, originally Leonardo DiCaprio was offered this part, which he turned it down to do Titanic. I think Mark Wahlberg was the better choice, even though Leo is the better actor. So I'm not too sure if you have any thoughts about that.
I think I think I agree, And I also think that I think Leo taking Titanic over this was also, I know he regrets that choice. Well, not regret it. I don't think he regrets the choice to take Titanic. I am fairly certain I've heard him say he regrets the choice not to go to Boogie Nights.
Yes.
But first off, as you said, Mark Wahlberg is the better choice for this anyway. And also, like, I think that the fact that Mark Wahlberg is outshined here by everyone else, yes, partially that is due to Mark Wahlberg's, acting ability compared to everyone else here. Everyone else also has way like meteor has much. Wow, is it? I was gonna say that is partially on the script, but I don't know. Maybe if maybe and I think Dirk Diggler does have like some really good writing behind him too. So maybe not. Maybe it is just that he's having to share the screen with Philip Baker Hall, William H. Macy, John C. Reilly, Burt Reynolds. That's who I was trying to say. Burt
Yeah.
Reynolds and Julianne Moore.
Yeah. Heather Graham. Yeah. Louise Guzman.
Mm.
So many people here. I think we've got two different sides of things. Like, I would say people like the Don Cheadle character or the William H. Macy characters, they don't have as much to do, but they're written so well, given their limited sort of screen time, that they don't need to have a fully fleshed out arc. They just need to have these great moments, which they're given. Whereas everyone else of the main cast, the Burt Reynolds, Julianne Moore, Heather Graham, John C. Reilly, it's about their interactions more specifically with the Mark Wahlberg character. And I think their interactions and their arcs surrounding their relationship with Dirk Diggler is far more interesting.
Yeah. Really quick, this is an aside. I wasn't even going to bring this up. The guy that Dirk Diggler is based on is John C. Holmes.
Yeah.
And the reason I did bring him up anyway is because he had the fantastic porn name Johnny Wad.
Yeah, that's a good one. Much like Magnolia, we're talking about the ensemble nature of all this. This was one that didn't work for me upon first viewing, and on second viewing, it completely clicked. This is right at the top of my ballot. I absolutely love this film and totally get what all the adulation is for it. You have it a little bit lower than I do. This is middle of the pack for you. Was this, very similar to Magnolia that we were talking about? Is this just a case of everything else working better for you, or are there some issues for it that kind of hold it back from you?
No, this is the ones that are above this work a little bit better for me, but like that honestly might even change if I watch Boogie Nights again, because like thinking about this, Boogie Nights, when I was watching it, it reminded me a lot of Babylon, and by extension, it reminded me a lot of Singing in the Rain. Like this is so cool because it's basically a porn version of Singing in the Rain. By which I mean, not the Singing in the Rain porn parody, but like where Singing in the Rain is all about, basically talkies coming in and, what do silent movie stars do when they're when they're no longer relevant. This is that exact same thing, but for the porn industry. And I think it's really fascinating on like both it's fascinating at a historical level for that, because I don't think the porn industry is something that people think about in that particular way very often. I certainly don't. And also that, like, I think it's I mean, I haven't personally heard him mention it, but I know for a fact Paul Thomas Anderson has seen Singing in the Rain, and I think it's an amazing choice to do Singing in the Rain, but for the death of porn in the 70s. That's so interesting. Like there's one scene in this, and this is probably, I think this scene is where it like really clicked for me that that's what he was doing. Philip Baker Hall comes in and like has a meeting with Burt Reynolds where they're talking about, I think they're talking about the advent of VHS. Like they're going to stop making movies. They're going to stop making porn movies for porn theaters and start making them for home, because that's going to be a better distribution model. And that's where I was like, oh, this is talkies coming in and taking over silent movies. This
Mm-hmm.
is the entire industry, like, suddenly being pulled out from under his feet. And it immediately becomes that. Like, right afterwards, I think there's a very, very small time skip, that, like, where after that, everyone is, basically everyone's careers are destroyed or fully unrecognizable when compared to what they were before. And I don't know, like, porn singing in the rain is such an interesting idea that, like, when you think about it, it's such a natural idea because he's bringing this in, like, he's really talking about a historical event here that more or less really happened. The names are different, but this is a thing that happened and people were really affected by. And it's just like not something that most people would have thought of. Except that he's this kid who grew up in the 70s and has a huge appreciation for what the porn industry was in the 70s, which, it was a really unique and interesting time that he's able to capture in this movie.
Mm-hmm. And like to add a little bit of context is the porn industry has always sort of been on the forefront of new technology. And we see this with the advent of VHS, but like the porn industry backed VHS over Betamax, which is why VHS won out. And then the same thing happened, post DVD when it was between Blu-ray and HD DVD, the porn industry back the Blu-rays, and so was the dominant format going forward. And the industry was also one of the first to readily accept credit card payments online. So that became a thing. So like literally almost all technological advancements have come through what industry does the porn one back, and their consumers will follow them with it. So it's very interesting in that we do get the basis of that with the VHS stuff when the Philip Baker Hall character comes in, all that sort of stuff. And, Jack Horner thinks it's the end of the world for them because they're no longer movies, they're disposable things. But in reality, it was a revolutionization that they just weren't able to adapt to.
Yeah, and I think that, like, um Jack Horner thinking that is the end, he's not totally wrong because it does fully change the art form that they were going for. And
Mm-hmm.
like, they show in Boogie Nights, they show a lot of what that art form is, and it's not exactly what you think of when you think of high art. Like, we're not talking about, when they're showing the movies, the acting is horrible. And in fact, it's really impressive that John C. Reilly and Mark Wahlberg are able to act like horrible actors when they have to when they're in that part. It's like very
Yeah.
meta. Um, but you know, but on the other on another level, like, it is when they show the VHS stuff, it is like more, it is very different, and it is, more disposable. It's not able to be as, when the first thing that one of the first things that Dirk Diggler wants to do is he wants to create like a series of movies. He wants to create a serial. And that serial, again, not exactly great, but it's also something that benefits tremendously from being something that people go to the theater to see, where when it's on VHS, like, it's kind of just, it's not the same. It's not that there's exactly, prestige is the wrong word, but it's the closest word to what I can get at. It's not nearly as prestigious. And so when it is just the industry changing in a way they're not able to adapt to. But the reason they're not able to adapt to that on some level is, at least, for people like Jack Horner, for people like Dirk Diggler, it's that, like, the industry is moving into something that just, like, it doesn't support them. That their type of art is just over at that point. It's
Mm-hmm.
basically just gone, extinct.
Yeah. Is Philip Seymour Hoffman's performance as Scotty the single most tragic performance in any PTA movie? Because his unrequited love for Dirk and his uncomfortableness with his own homosexuality is just so heartbreaking to watch, as he tries to tell his feelings to Dirk a couple times and just he cannot get out, and at one point he tries to kiss him, and like you just feel the absolute heartbreak and shame that he feels.
Yeah, and he is he's very he's really unstable in that too. And I think that another thing that this movie can really communicate very well, it communicates really well, is like the people in this, especially the younger people in this industry, Philip Seymour Hoffman, John C. Reilly, Mark Wahlberg, all their characters, they're kind of they're recruited basically as teenagers. Like as soon as they're legal to be on camera, they're recruited, and like as a result of that, they never get the opportunity to wrestle with things that normal young adults wrestle with, because like Mark Wahlberg, Dirk Diggler is he's his entire like career happens between the time he's 19 and I want to say maybe 26. It might even just be 23. And at near the end, when he's I think it is 23, the only thing he can do, the only skill he has, is acting in porn, and he's not actually even that good at it, or he's not actually that good at the acting part. So he can't transfer that to anything. And with Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, a part of like why that is so tragic, that he can't wrestle with those, like he's already in a society that is not going to support him while he wrestles with his homosexuality. But beyond that, like he's never had the ability to wrestle with even the parts of that like you can you can wrestle with, like that are just young adult even the parts of that are just young adult feelings. He can't really deal with, because he's not in a like community where that's something he needs to think about. And so he doesn't, he ends up being basically this person with he's a very tragic character, and a big part of that tragedy comes from the fact that he is developmentally stunted, as are so many of his colleagues.
Yeah. And it's just crazy. I love that you point out just how condensed this story timeline is. And it's something that I think PTA does really well with framing it, because the way this arc goes is everything is up for this career, and then literally it's New Year's going from 1979 to 1980, and at that time, Little Bill, played by William H. Macy, catches his wife cheating on him yet again, and so he kills himself at a New Year's party, and literally everything is downhill after that for everyone. And it's just crazy the way he's able to map out this character arc for everyone that simultaneously is going up, and then everything is downhill for all of them afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And like there's a bit of a happy resolution for some of them by the end, but like it almost feels like it's a bittersweet resolution, not necessarily a happy resolution or a happy ending.
Yeah, because like even for example, this movie ends, and I guess here's spoilers, but it ends on like a somewhat hopeful in isolation scene for Dirk Diggler, where he's gotten another porn gig, and he can like it might be softcore. Anyway, it's like his acting is actually required in addition to his penis. But like it's in isolation, it's almost a hopeful scene, because it's like him telling himself he can do it, and then he goes out and does it. Or we don't see that part, but he goes out and he does the thing he's telling himself he can do. But also, this scene in the context of the movie comes after his immense career highs, and essentially essentially his career has been over, and now it's like his comeback, and he is as old in that scene, I'm pretty sure, as Mark Wahlberg was when he filmed this, which is like 23. So his entire life has happened by the time he's 23. And in that time, here's another thing that I saw Adam Naiman put in his book, and I'm going to ruthlessly steal. By the time he's 23, he is more a penis with a man attached than he is a man with a penis.
That's great. That's a good one. I love this movie. It was so fantastic. The Alfred Molina scene near the end probably rivals that scene in Punch Drunk Love as one of the most intense scenes, as this drug deal gone bad, and he's got this other guy at his house just throwing these little firecrackers while the music is being played unbearably loud. Like, it is just a high strung scene from start to finish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that scene is so hard to watch because like there there's some people that are there's like Thomas Jane is trying to like kill someone in there and he's not letting on. Uh John C. Reilly and Mark Wahlberg don't really know what's going on. They think they're part of a drug deal. They just want to get that over with and leave. There's some kid who's throwing fireworks, and Alfred Molina doesn't really want to do any part of that. He just kind of he's just having fun. I'm not even sure what he's doing. He's just doing something. And like no one is involved in what's actually supposed to be happening in that scene. And everyone is trying to bring like tug whatever's happening to whatever they want to be happening, and it doesn't work at all, and it is so it's so stressful to watch. Like, frankly, this is the one that I think this is probably the scene in all of these movies that stressed me out as much as something like Uncut Gems does, for as much as Punch Drunk Love also gets like a lot of the stressfulness of Uncut Gems clearly inspired by Punch Drunk Love, but there's like where that energy is most replicated, in my opinion, in these movies is that scene right there, which is so hard to watch.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, let's move on to our number 2 film, and that is, drumroll please, for no one, One Battle After Another from 2025. When their enemy resurfaces after 16 years, a group of ex-revolutionaries reunite to rescue the daughter of one of their own. So this is the movie. Obviously, by now, I feel like everyone should know this. Just won Best Picture last year, or earlier this year, from last year. And it's about a group of revolutionary people known as the French 75, led by Perfidia Beverly Hills, played by Teyana Taylor, and her boyfriend, Ghetto Pat, played by Leonardo DiCaprio. And they, after the birth of their child, she realizes that she doesn't or can't be a mother and leaves Pat and their child together. And then later on, 16 years later, when this child is now in high school, Bob, as he's now known as, living in protection, has his daughter kidnapped, and he has to go and chase after her from Colonel Stephen J. Lockjaw, who has her. This is kind of a triptych story in terms of the way this works. We've got this, prologue, which is the first chapter, and then, it's this sequence of Bob and his daughter trying to get away with her ultimately being kidnapped, and then the final chapter being the recovery of her. I absolutely love this movie, adore it. I love the politics of this movie. I don't know how you can watch this and not just be absolutely jazzed up to tear down the system. Literally everything about this movie is working on all levels for me.
I've fully agreed. And this is, like I said, this is my top 2 of last year. Like, I think usually I would say it's my number 1 of last year. I would probably also say that today. So, big highlight of 2025 for me. I saw this one 2 times in theaters, and I think I've seen it 2 times since it left theaters too. This was great.
Mm-hmm. And much like all of his other films, the supporting characters in this all shine. Sean Penn just won Best Supporting Actor in this for having the most ridiculous walk and mannerisms we've seen in a villain in quite a while, and it all works with how over the top it is. Benicio del Toro absolutely shined. We didn't even talk about him in Inherent Vice, as great as he is there, but he shows up as the karate master of his daughter's karate school, and my favorite line is, "We've got a little Latino Harriet Tubman situation going on," that gets said, because he's basically, Bob is as a part of the French 75, and he thinks he's sort of alone in this world, but the reality is that there are revolutionaries all among our community. And I love this idea of being a member of your community is an act of revolution in and of itself. And it's so great seeing, everyone working together, and we are stronger together if we fight together, and all these sort of morals that PTA is going on. And yeah, this could come off as grandstanding, but I think the politics and the earnestness all work together so well.
Well, that community bit you were just highlighting, it's to the point where one of the things that's interesting about this movie is like Bob Ferguson uh, doesn't really save his daughter. Like he doesn't really he's not really the one that saves Willa. He's the one that like is finally involved in the final car chase. But even then, like the only way that he could even be there is because the entire community is working together. Like he only gets as far as he does. He only gets even started with like that whole journey because the community comes together, not even specifically to help him, but to help him. Like he doesn't get anywhere without his community. Because and I like you notice that from he doesn't even interact directly with Willa except at the very beginning and the very end. And every step of the way of him trying to track down Sean Penn, is he gets literally every step of the way he is either being carried by someone who is helping him get further, or he is asking for directions from someone, or he is happily or at the very end a happy accident occurs that sets him that finally pushes him over the edge. He's a very, as active as he seems in this movie, Bob is actually, and this is for the better, I don't mean this as like a slight or anything, he's actually a pretty passive character in this movie, despite trying to be an active character. It's really more everything around him comes together to help him achieve his goal. I think it's that community bit is very it's very explicit, but it's also very much I think the point of a lot of the movie.
Yeah, and I think that's also a bit of a theme that PTA's explored a few times. I would say, similar lead characters that are a bit more passive would be Doc Sportello in Inherent Vice. Yeah, that might be that's probably the main one, really, where that's kind of the case. Where very similarly, the main character doesn't quite control their own destiny. Even I would even say Dirk Diggler in Boogie Nights is probably in a bit of a similar boat as well, to very different degrees. Obviously, Bob is the most explicit of this kind of character for sure, where he is seemingly passive. He is doing everything he can to get his daughter back, but in the end, his actions are not what gets his daughter back.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's very interesting. I gotta say, I love Leo's performance in this. He is such a loving and caring parent, and you could tell the emotional trauma and scars that he has been carrying, and how he's trying to protect Willa and protect himself too. And in order to do that, he unfortunately has to self-medicate, which is played off as laughs, but I think is done, is quite a real thing that someone like this probably would have gone through.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say this from experience, obviously, but being a single dad sounds really, really hard at the best of times. Being a single dad in witness protection with a villain after you is almost certainly harder. But yeah, and I think this is one where this is building on a lot of things. This is obviously building on a lot of things that Paul Thomas Anderson has already explored in other movies, and really bringing them into a new context and with a fresh lens. This is where I was really. This is the one that when I was watching Hard Eight, I was immediately reminded of this, and I think I mentioned it when we were talking about Hard Eight, 5 hours ago. that in Hard Eight, the father character in that is written not from the perspective of a father. He's got this, he's got a history. I'm sure that Philip Baker Hall was bringing plenty of his own ideas to that as well, but he is like part of what makes him an intriguing father. Like part of what that movie is exploring in its father character is sort of this is sort of mysterious. It's sort of intentionally, you want to look up to this guy, even if you don't know everything about him. And I think in this movie, it comes clearly from the opposite side of that, the opposite lens, where Leonardo DiCaprio, his character Bob Ferguson, is like bringing in all of this perspective. Like he's got all these little lines that flesh him out specifically as a father. He's not a mysterious parent. I don't know what Willa thinks necessarily, but like we know him very well. He's a complex character from the start. We get, when we learn that he's a single dad with a 16-year-old daughter, we know who he was before. And as we learn more about him throughout the movie, we learn, what being a father means to him, which I think is really sweet. This movie always makes me like get a little teary-eyed by the end. He's got one line that I think is that I think is so good. He's talking to Sensei Sergio as they're driving, and he says that he doesn't know how to do his daughter's hair, which I think is such a sweet line. And I believe, this is anecdotal, I don't know if he actually said this for sure, I believe that is like directly from Paul Thomas Anderson's life, because I think he actually doesn't know how to do his daughter's hair. And I know that Maya Rudolph has said that her dad didn't know how to do her hair. So that is like a very, that's directly from that experience, which, obviously was not an experience he was able to draw from when he was making Hard Eight.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the experiences come from Paul Thomas Anderson with having, mixed race children with Maya Rudolph, his experiences, and then as a parent, and then Maya Rudolph's experience of being the child of mixed race parents. And so I think the two of them really helped inform some of the, backstory and character decisions that these people make. This has, I don't know, some of the most quotable lines in all of PTA's works. You see the memes of
a few small beers,
everything. Yeah. A few small beers. Do you like black girls? I love them. A whole bunch of stuff that happens in this. The note that Perfidia leaves Lockjaw. This is easily, one of PTA's funniest screenplays and most memorable. I love it. I'm so happy. Let's finish this on this topic. Do you feel that this was the right movie for PTA to win Best Picture and Best Director for? Or, do you think this was maybe a little bit long overdue and he probably should have won earlier in his career?
So I'm going to start by answering the first question with yes. Like this is absolutely, at the very least, this is absolutely one of the movies that he should have won Best Picture and Best Director for. I was very happy with that win. I think that more so than anything, I think that win was very deserved for this movie. Should he have won earlier? Maybe also yes, actually. But I think that sometimes when people ask that question, and I know this isn't what you were specifically asking, but sometimes when people ask that, the implied question is this a legacy win for Paul Thomas Anderson? Is this an overdue win for The Master or Phantom Threads or hell, even Boogie Nights? No, I don't think this is like an apology for a previous movie. I think this is like of his movies, this one is a Best Picture for sure.
Mm-hmm. It's very similar to the arc that Christopher Nolan had with Oppenheimer, where you can argue that he probably should have won previously, but both of these movies were the right movies to win and are going to be looked back very favorably as these are career-defining moments for both of these filmmakers.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, well, there is no surprise to what our number one film is going to be, and that is 2007's There Will Be Blood. So thank you, everyone, for listening today. It's been a great episode. No, I'm just kidding. We are going to talk about There Will Be Blood. So no shock here. We both rated this extremely high. This was your number one film. This was my number two film. So yeah. What's not to love about this? We mentioned off the top of the show, you recently did a podcast, exclusively talking about that. So I'll link to that in the show notes. So if you want to hear more of a long form discussion between you and Pierre, that is a great place to go to. But what do you have to say about this movie that you have not already said before or hasn't been said by other people?
Well, very, very quickly, I will say that in that episode, I talk a lot more about what I already mentioned with The Master. Obviously, in the context of There Will Be Blood, talking about, how I think this movie just kind of gets to the heart of the rot at American society through one, very specific example. And that is the thing that really resonates with me so much about this movie. When I was talking about The Master earlier, I said, in The Master, that rot is more metaphysical because it's sort of a cult. And it's talking about how, this time in history was uniquely suitable for this cult to spring up. And as a result, the society afterwards has been shaped, not wholly, but at least in part, by the existence of a cult within it that is preying on vulnerable people. I think that this movie says something very similar, but as I said as I sort of alluded to, with something very physical. In this case, oil. This movie is about, at least in large part, about how, that oil, how oil and the greed that comes out of, and the greed that leads people to exploit this natural resource, resonates throughout society through this, essentially through this greedy capitalist society. And it really, it's a very bleak movie because of that. That movie, everyone in this movie sucks, as in a lot of movies. But Daniel Plainview, despite being a more complex character even early on, there's no doubt when you're watching this movie that he is an intensely evil character, complex in that evilness, but he is a man that is completely, he's basically the devil, and he is, completely consumed by greed. He's this avatar of greed. And the only thing, one of the most fascinating things about this movie, and really the only thing in this movie that makes you question just how evil he is, in my opinion, is that at certain points, there is an implication that there are people who are out there who are somehow even more powerful and more evil than Daniel Plainview, which is actually something that I think is really interesting in One Battle After Another too, and that I really like. I think Paul Thomas Anderson is able to really effectively communicate through those, is that the most evil physical person that he can put in his movie is still somehow small potatoes compared to an admittedly nebulous force, because I specifically described the first person as the most evil person he can put in this movie. We don't get a lot of the secret societies or the, big company in There Will Be Blood, or the secret society in One Battle After Another. We get enough to know that they exist and that they are very bad, and that in fact they may be worse than the most evil person in that movie. But that's interesting in that it makes that evil, that, this Daniel Plainview character, who is functionally and, almost portrayed as the devil, he's somehow a real person because this nebulous worse person is out there. And we know enough to know that there is something worse that's out there, which makes this unspeakable evil, this unimaginably evil person, Daniel Plainview, somehow real.
Yeah. It's interesting. It kind of, pairs as a nice dichotomy with One Battle After Another, where one battle shows the hopefulness that America has to offer in terms of people coming together and achieving, great things against unmeasurable odds, whereas There Will Be Blood is sort of the flip side of look at the absolute worst of society, especially the unchecked, capitalism that you were talking about, and greed that is the rot of America as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the two of them work very well together in that regards of showing you the different sides of things. You're talking about these nameless people who are probably more powerful, more evil than Daniel Plainfield. Specifically, they're probably the Standard Oil executives. Those are the people behind the scenes in one battle after another in the Christmas Adventurers Club pulling those strings. Those are like the same types of people, the titans of industry, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just such a fascinating way to look at it. But this is a look at what one of humanity's worst can offer the world. What do they bring in? What sort of parasitic, leech-filled nature does someone like Daniel Plainview bring to this world? Because yes, he may be a made-up character, but he is not a fictitious person. These are real people. We can point to someone, today who news just came out is the world's first trillionaire. That person is Daniel Plainview.
Yeah, and I think that, one other thing, and I think I mentioned this when we were talking about The Master, is you also can't make a movie like this if you don't at least a little bit like something about the result of it. So in this case, what I'm saying is I don't think you can cynically make There Will Be Blood about, an American person who has only ever lived in America is not going to cynically make There Will Be Blood about the UK. You have to at least kind of love America in order to make this, and not in a way of not in every way that implies, but ultimately, this is historical, and ultimately the result of the world that comes out of There Will Be Blood, for as much as horrible as everything, for as much damage as Daniel Plainview does, ultimately the world that comes out of that is our world. That is just, we now live in America. The world that comes out of the America that Daniel Plainview lives in is just it's 40 years removed from Licorice Pizza, but it is the same world as Licorice Pizza. And Licorice Pizza, obviously a much more hopeful movie than There Will Be Blood, but despite that, the current world we live in, the beauty of that world is built on for as many problems as there are, the beautiful parts of that world are also built on this rotting foundation. So I think, and this is I guess also, to tie it in a little more specifically, technically, to There Will Be Blood, this is a very beautiful movie. There's a lot of great shots here, a lot of great scenery, but even in examining this evil that's there and below the surface, ultimately that just becomes what we have now. It's sort of looking at, and I think also 2007, this was right around the I think it predated the big stock market crash that happened. That was 2008. Right?
Yeah, that would have been 2008.
Yeah. So this movie, it's not it's obviously not about the stock market crash. It hadn't even happened at that point yet. But this movie, for being historical, is about it's about a very current thing. He is depicting he's depicting the past of America, but it is a fictitious past which leads to us. So there's he's talking when he's writing this America of the early 1900s, he's writing it from the early 2000s, and you get and this is he's commenting on a current problem as much as he is commenting on something that is sort of an problem at the same time. I don't know if any of that makes sense. Hopefully it all makes sense. I talk about this for an hour and a half anyway, so go listen to that.
We're trying to condense this, to 10 minutes. I this is a movie that I think there's been a million things said about this, the scope, the production design of this, the cinematography, the score by Johnny Greenwood, the the explosion of the Derrick rig is still so damn good looking. This is over 20 years later now that this was filmed. They do such a good job. Every aspect about this movie is fantastic. And Daniel Day-Lewis honestly feels like a time traveler. The fact that like he's a real person today, it doesn't seem real. Like he feels like he's Daniel Plainville so physically and so embodies everything about that.
I think I may have also mentioned this in our podcast episode of it, but Daniel Day-Lewis in this movie is unrecognizable as the same Daniel Day-Lewis in Phantom Thread. Both incredible performances, to be clear, but like I have to do a lot of work in my head to reconcile those two people as the same person.
Yeah. And it's also interesting, you know, I mentioned off the top all the people that have worked with him a bunch of times. It almost feels crazy that Daniel Day-Lewis has only done 2 films with Anderson, and yet, you know, if you were to name one actor who you most associate with PTA, it would either be Philip Seymour Hoffman or it would be Daniel Day-Lewis, and Daniel Day-Lewis only in 2 films is remarkable.
And I think part of that is you're saying it's crazy that he's only done 2 with PTA. On the other, it's actually kind of crazy that he's even done 2 with PTA, because there are very few people that, like Daniel Day-Lewis, famously, very small filmography, very selective in his roles. I think there's like maybe there's only a handful of directors he's worked with more than once, and Paul Thomas Anderson is one of those directors, which is maybe why it's so tempting to associate him so closely with Paul Thomas Anderson, because, you know, on the one hand, you can be like, oh, he's only been in 2 PTA films. On the other hand, you can be like, Paul Thomas Anderson directed Daniel Day-Lewis twice.
Yeah. All right. You know, we've been rambling on for a very long time, so I think we're going to wrap up that there, and we're going to quickly go over our awards. Best picture for me, it was Boogie Nights. I can't believe how much it grew in estimation. I think in my original rankings, it probably would have been in the 6 to 7 range, and it shot up to be my number 1 film. What about you? What's your number 1 film?
It's There Will Be Blood. So someone had to have that as their number 1, and that's going to be me today. So that's my best picture. I remember when I was rewatching this year, I went into it knowing that I really liked this movie, but I hadn't seen it in a while. So I was like, am I gonna like it as much as the other ones I've seen? I've recently rewatched, and I was blown away yet again. So, you know, It was tempting to try and put something else on there just to highlight one of the other movies, but we just spent 2 hours highlighting all the other movies. I think it's fine to say Best Picture goes to There Will Be Blood for me.
Yeah, no, that's very fair. Best Actor. This was a very tricky one. In the end, I don't know if I totally love this, but I am going with Leonardo DiCaprio for One Battle After Another. I think he just does such a phenomenal job with that role, showing a warmth and grace that is not found in other PTA movies, and it's so unique and bold that I just love it. And honestly, I really wish Leo would won the Best Actor Oscar last year, because he was that good. It does feel a little sacrilegious not picking a PTA performance, but maybe you'll rectify the situation and have a better pick than me.
Did you say a PTA performance? Because
in a performance in a PTA film.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. So this one, very difficult for me, but made a little bit easier by the fact that I decided somewhere halfway through putting together this list that I was going to try and keep it to 1 movie each. So each one of these awards is going to go to a different movie, which made this easy because it was a 3-way tie before, and it very quickly narrowed it to Philip Seymour Hoffman from The Master. I thought, you know, especially on rewatching this, Lancaster Dodd is such an incredible performance from Philip Seymour Hoffman. I already talked about it a little bit. I love that performance. I think he's incredible in it, and I think he was nominated for best actor that year. I do not believe he won, but
which, you know, is criminal.
He should have, and unfortunately, very unfortunately, he won't get the chance again. But yeah, he was. Oh, no, he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. So
okay. Either way. I consider that a 2-hander. They're both leads.
Yeah, that's probably you know, if this was 2013, we would probably be talking about category fraud.
Yes,
But
yes.
one way or another, I thought he was incredible in that. I think that's, there's a lot of great performances in that movie. He really runs away with it, even though
Mhm.
even in a movie where Joaquin Phoenix is also giving one of his strongest performances ever. So
Yeah.
I'm going to put Philip Seymour Hoffman as best actor there.
Nice. So for Best Actress, the pickings are a little bit slim here. Ran into the same issue with both Christopher Nolan and the Wes Anderson ranked episodes as well. But for me, I'm going with Alana Haim, probably the only real true leading role by a female performer in his filmography in Licorice Pizza. But yeah, I was really blown away. I thought she had fantastic chemistry with Cooper Hoffman and I loved all of her scenes. I loved her arc. So yeah, that's an easy pick for me. But I did debate a couple other ones as well. So I'm curious to see who you went with.
This one, I maybe stretched this is one where maybe I stretched the definition of best actress a little bit. Like maybe you would consider this a supporting role. But I think that Chase Infiniti had maybe, but right behind Alana Haim, probably the closest to a leading role, like a leading role for a woman in a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, and also
Mm-hmm.
was incredible in it. This is like One Battle After Another was an incredible debut for Chase Infiniti. I think that, once again, a lot of great performances in that movie. I think that she's basically the main character of that movie anytime Leo is not on screen, and I think that she holds her own there really well. Alongside Leonardo DiCaprio of all people. So like she's
Yeah.
what a debut where she can be as fun to watch as one of the most famously fun to watch actors ever.
Yeah. Yeah. For supporting actor, this was probably the single most trickiest one to pick. You can go in a couple different routes. You can either go maybe who had a scene stealing performance, maybe Philip Seymour Hoffman in Punch Drunk Love, or someone with a more meaty performance, like maybe one of like Sean Penn in One Battle After Another. Much like you, I'm also giving every award to a different film. In the end, I am going with Paul Dano from There Will Be Blood. Much like how you commented Chase Infiniti going toe-to-toe with Leo, Paul Dano going toe-to-toe with Daniel Day-Lewis might be even more impressive. Specifically the baptism scene where he gets Daniel Plainview to admit that he abandoned his boy. Just phenomenal acting. And the fact that Dano, famously stepped into playing that part after filming had already begun. He had been cast as the twin brother that runs away and then plays Eli as well. Phenomenal work.
Crazy to think that Paul Dano was originally like basically just a cameo in that movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Best supporting actor, we talked about him a lot, so I will probably keep relatively brief. Josh Brolin. I went Josh Brolin with Inherent Vice. I think he's like a uniquely interesting performance in a PTA movie because we get such a rich character with so little. Like there is more. There is clearly. I think maybe people have gotten the impression. I hope people haven't gotten the impression when I've talked about Josh Brolin in Inherent Vice on this episode that like he's not doing anything in that movie. He's doing so much. It's just that he's like a little bit inscrutable, kind of like Philip Baker Hall in Hard Eight. And I think that he's able to, use that to such tremendous effect too. I mean, I already said it when we were talking about Inherent Vice. I think it's one of Josh Brolin's finest performances ever. And for that reason, I'm going to put that as best supporting actor.
I'm so happy you picked that. That's such a terrific choice. Yeah, I'm very, very glad. And then the last award, supporting actress. This is also one that, we had a bit of an embarrassment of riches. I decided to maybe go a little bit off the board here and pick Lesley Manville from Phantom Thread. I think, once again, I'm picking both my supporting performances of people going toe-to-toe with Daniel Day-Lewis, and she does a great job of both being his right arm, but also being the only person to challenge him and be able to get away with challenging him in the way that she does. That is just so powerful and just such a terrific performance by her. You know, when she goes, I will go straight through you, when he, you know, threatens her and she threatens him right back, is just a chilling moment that I love so much.
Mm-hmm. Lesley Manville, of course, rightfully nominated for an Academy Award for that role, did not win.
Yep.
For Best Supporting Actress, I picked Julianne Moore for Boogie Nights. Now, she's been in a couple. I could have picked her for Magnolia as well, but I think she's really, really good in Boogie Nights. I think one thing we talked about when we talked about Boogie Nights is it feels like this grand epic saga, and it takes place over about 4 or 5 years. And I think Julianne Moore's role in that is one that is so much more, like, from a writing level especially, it's so much more impressive when you think about that. Like, her character is so much more impressive when you think about, you know, how condensed that time is, and how, like, I don't know exactly how old her character is supposed to be in that movie, but she's like maybe early 30s. Like, she's not that old, but like, she basically has to step in as a mother to all these other porn stars, and she feels like, you know, I mean this in a good way, she feels like the oldest person on set, the adult on set, even though her character is probably younger than I am right now in that movie. Julianne Moore, frankly, might have been younger than I am now in that movie. And like, it all happens in, you know, such a condensed window. I think she's, you know, I think she's also, as a performance, she is incredible in that movie. She has such great chemistry with everyone, specifically Burt Reynolds and Mark Wahlberg. And she also has her own stuff going on. I think that Paul Thomas Anderson writes a really interesting arc for her character that is basically, you know, that basically lets her go off and do her own thing, away from the rest of the Boogie Nights cast, which, you know, makes her role a lot more major in that. I actually originally, when I was writing this down, had her in as Best Actress, but I'm glad that I remembered Chase Infiniti for Best Actress, because now I can highlight both of them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, terrific. I'll just point out there that we gave awards to 7 of his 10 films. Only Hard 8, Magnolia, and Punch Drunk Love didn't get any awards love here, which kind of shows the scope and the breadth that his filmography has. Jeff, this is an absolute monster episode. Thank you so much. Really appreciate all of your insight and your wisdoms that you brought to this episode.
Thank you for having me. This is the longest episode I have personally ever heard of Contra Zoom Pod. So hopefully people enjoy that, because I had a blast.
Well, good. Me too. Where can people find more of your work and what you got going on?
So people can find me on I have a show with my co-host Pierre called Classic Movies Live, if you're not already aware. We talk mostly about movies that have just come out, but recently this year we've been doing a few more of what people might think of when they think of classics. We've been doing some older movies. We've started going through the Indiana Jones movies. We plan to finish that here in the near future, but June is very big for movies. So we're going to talk about things like Disclosure Day, Supergirl, stuff like that. We actually just had not quite this much of a monster, but like a pretty long episode of our own talking about just some of the horror movies that came out in May, because there were some really good horror movies, and I am very excited that I had a chance to talk about them. For example, Backrooms. That's probably one of my favorite movies of the year so far, and if you want to know why, you can check out our episode.
Ooh, love the plug there. Perfect. Yeah, that was a great episode. Make sure you check that out. I will link to all of that in the show notes, along with you've covered a few PTA movies on your show over the years, so I will link to that as well. And then this has been a That Shelf podcast. Visit thatshelf.com for more great film discourse. Follow the show on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at ContraZoomPod. What are your favorite PTA films? Leave a comment on Spotify or send us an email. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, we do post all episodes there as well. And if you really like the show, consider tipping us on coffee. Thanks for checking us out.